Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Development Control. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Could everybody please note the meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and could everybody turn their mobile phones off or to silent, please? For the benefit of members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I would like to explain who everybody is. My name is Councillor Nick Robinson and I'm chairman of this committee. To my right are councillors who will be making decisions on the applications on this evening's agenda. To my immediate right and left are officers who will be presenting the applications and providing advice to the committee. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be considering the published papers, examining the evidence brought before us tonight, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting in the order set out in the update paper. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and keep points made to the application on material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. May I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and keep their comments on each planning item to a maximum of 4 minutes. I think we've got 8 items on the agenda tonight, and I hope we can do it within 3 hours. I understand that planning can be emotive and ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout this meeting. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I have apologies from Councillors Gaskell and Rattigan. And substitutions, I have Councillor Morrow sitting in for Councillor Hussey. Urgent matters, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Morrow.
Yeah, item 7, I'm on Tadley Town Council and the Rec and Leisure, so I won't be sitting in on that one.
Thank you. Urgent matters, I have nothing. Anybody else? No urgent matters. Minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of August 2022. I move they are correct. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Harvey, and I will sign those at the end of the meeting. Applications for planning. Catherine, I suppose.
Thank you, Chairman. The first item before you this evening is for land between the A339 and Faulkner Road, Kingsclere. The proposal seeks full planning permission for the erection of a 50-bed care home, which is in use class C2, along with associated infrastructure such as the parking, access, landscaping and other works. If I take members' attention to the update paper, this site was subject to the viewing last Friday, and members can read the aspects of the viewing within the paper. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the completion of a legal agreement and conditions as set out within the agenda before you. Thank you.
And if we could have our first speaker, which is John Sawyer, to the speakers' chairs, which are just in front of you. You have 4 minutes. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the console in front of you. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, councillors. I'm John Sawyer, Kingsclere Parish Councillor. Kingsclere Parish Council objects to this application principally because it does not align with policy KHA1 of our neighbourhood plan for at least 12 houses on the site. Our neighbourhood plan took 5 years to produce, was passed by 80% of those voting, at a cost of about £20,000 to the public purse. The borough clearly supported this process with this statement. The Borough Council strongly supports the principle of neighbourhood planning. Neighbourhood planning offers local communities the opportunity to come together and agree on joint aspirations for their area and consequently guide future decisions. Kingsclere Parish Council believe that there is no justifiable reason to overturn the existing approved planning permission granted by the local planning authority for housing on this site. It is a designated site within the Kingsclere neighbourhood plan selected to house local people and meet the housing target set by the Borough Council. The approved planning permission for 13 houses meets the principle of sustainable development. Paragraph 112 of the NPPF states, where a planning application conflicts with an up-to-date development plan, permission should not usually be granted. Local planning authorities may make decisions that depart from an up-to-date development plan, but only if material considerations in a particular case indicate that the plan should not be followed. Support for the care home takes the policy K3 of our neighbourhood plan out of context. Our policy expresses a desire for elderly people to live independently in suitably designed homes. During the neighbourhood plan consultation, no desire was ever expressed for a palliative care home facility. In short, the proposed care home meets the needs of residents from the borough and beyond, but not the residents of Kingsclere. Yes, the care home would add an additional 15 units towards the housing target, but this is not a numbers game. We're talking about the real needs of the people of Kingsclere, and to grant this application would actually deprive 13 families of the homes that they need. The proposal has implications for parking too, both on-site and in neighbourhood residential streets. Staff and visitors would be reliant on the car due to the very limited bus service. The applicant has not actively engaged with the community as claimed, contrasting with the very wide-ranging consultation during the neighbourhood planning process. There has been no public meeting or display of proposals, rather a website, a leaflet drop, selective doorstepping exercise, in short, a one-way dissemination of views. Current government guidance states that local planning authorities may make minor changes to neighbourhood plans, but only with the consent of the qualifying body, that is, the parish council. At no time have we been consulted. What this committee has been asked to do today is to change a policy in a made neighbourhood plan without any evidence to show that the current policy for 13 homes on this site is unsustainable, undeliverable or not required. If approved, the message to all parish and town councils is that the borough is prepared to overturn any policy in a made neighbourhood plan without consulting the qualifying bodies. Parish and town councils expect the borough to uphold this commitment to neighbourhood planning and to be awaiting, I will be awaiting this decision with interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the Speaker? Councillor Frost, followed by Councillor Morrow.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just a question of clarification about the car parking and also the splays. Can you elucidate how small the car parking is in your opinion? Thank you.
The car parking that is available on site is 18 spaces. I can remind you that this is a 50-bed care home. There are obviously national standards for staffing. There'll be shift changes, there'll be other vehicle movements, and there will be visitors. Our concern is that there will be overspill off the site into neighbouring streets, And I noticed that the officer in charge dismisses concerns about parking by saying other homes in Hampshire have been granted permission with this sort of parking facility. I think you need to take note of the context of where this care home is. There is no parking nearby except in a residential street. And if you were to see that residential street in the evenings or at weekends, quite frankly, it is not doable.
But you're going to, sorry, I was going to ask the same question about parking. I guess a different question, in your neighbourhood plan, was you said that there wasn't much need for the elderly care for care homes. Was there any need that come up as a more, what did come up in the plan for?
Yes, with regard to housing for the elderly, what did come up was the suggestion that there should be smaller units, smaller purpose-built homes, wide doors, all of the facilities that you would expect for older people, so that they could remain in their homes. There was not a call for a care home. We have other facilities in the village anyway. I believe that the applicants, in quoting our policy on housing for the elderly, have actually misquoted it. If you actually read our neighbourhood plan, there is nothing about palliative care homes, and it was never ever mentioned. I chaired major meetings in the village about this, and this never ever came up. People said they wanted to downsize, so smaller units of housing were what they were looking for, which is what we are looking for on this site. We're looking for smaller types of houses that, with the usual affordable quota, which of course, if you have a care home, there's no such thing as an affordable quota.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Sawyer. A couple of questions I've got for you. The bus service. Could you explain the service that you have, and
Yes,
does it go?
we have a service that goes from Basingstoke to Newbury and back. It's called The Link. It runs once an hour between 7 in the morning and 7 at night, 6 days a week. Any other buses which are mentioned are buses that have been put on for school and college students. Now, whether members of the public can jump onto those or not, I don't know, but of course they only operate twice a day during term time.
Thank you. The other question, this particular site, and it says its proximity 600 metres, I think, to the local facilities. Can you comment on the quality of the footways and the access from the site into town for potentially elderly residents? Thank you.
The pavement is, the applicant has said that the pavement will be extended the last 50 metres or so to get to the gate of the home. They would then need to walk on a street-side pavement into the middle of the village. It is a considerable walk, which would be on the way home uphill. I do wonder, though, sorry, as a footnote, the residents of this home, I believe, are likely to be residents in an end-of-life situation. So the question of linking with the village is, I think, perhaps more theoretical than practical.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sawyer, would you agree with me that the neighbourhood plan is clear of your policy? Let me speak up. Would you agree with me that your neighbourhood plan policy is absolutely clear and the application that was permitted for the outline for the 13 houses was approved based upon, obviously, chiming with your condition, your policy? However, you have no policy on elderly care. You have no policy at all, as I understand it, in your neighbourhood plan on that, as you've just admitted yourself. On the basis of that, we have to judge the application within the red line in front of us. So we don't judge the 13 homes. That's passed, that's done. That outline permission stands. The application in front of us is judged purely on the basis of whether we approve the principle of a care home on the site and the strengths and weaknesses of the arguments in favour of that. Would you agree with me in my statement? You have an outline application for 13 units. That is in your policy. You don't have a policy on care in your neighbourhood plan at this time.
We have policy K3, housing for older people. And I would urge you to read that and the accompanying text that goes with that. And I think it makes it very clear what our policy on the elderly is. Yes, basically, as I said in my presentation, that policy is about allowing or having smaller properties that are purpose-built for elderly people, having properties which older people who live in larger houses in the village can downsize to. There are many villagers, and we came across them in our consultation for the neighbourhood plan. There are many villagers who express the desire to remain in the village, which they'd lived in for 20, 30, 50, 60, 80 years, but that they wanted to move to a smaller property. And this was particularly the case when what was called the bedroom tax came in, and people were very keen to move from their family homes into something smaller.
And a second question, Chair, if I can, just to finish. So would you agree then, on page 55 of our report, we are told that our evidence at the council is that there is a clear need for older persons accommodation in the borough, and you've clearly identified it in your policy in a particular way, but you would agree with that, wouldn't you, that there is actually need for older persons accommodation in our borough?
Yes, there is a need for independent living accommodation for older people.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for my final question. Councillor Sawyer, I just want to talk about or explore, okay, your understanding of the local need, okay, around Kingsclear for this sort of care home. Is it right that there is another care home on the other side of the village which has space, and how do you see the requirement or the need for elderly accommodation in Kingsclear, please?
I think the facility you're referring to is not, technically speaking, a care home. It is a residence for older people, and that certainly exists in the village, yes.
Thank you. Any more questions for the speaker? No? Thank you very much. And if we could have Mrs. Pearce, Sam Rouse and Debbie Palmer, please, to the... Thank you. You have 4 minutes between you. I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the console in front of you.
Chairman, members, thank you for allowing us to speak this evening. I'm Sam Rouse from Frontier Estates, the applicant. We're a leading developer in the later living sector, successfully delivering over 50 care homes in recent years. We're seeking permission for a new 50-bedroom care home, providing acute nursing care in a residential setting, catering for the increasing demand for elderly care facilities in the area. This is a Class C2 use, but provides a form of residential accommodation. The site is sustainably located and marries with the built form of Kingsclear, its services and facilities. It has excellent links to both Basingstoke and Newbury by car and bus, and has been earmarked as a good location for a care home. David Wilson Homes obtained planning permission for up to 13 houses on the site, but marketed and sold the land through commercial agents to Frontier in mid-2020. The care home operates on a shift pattern, usually 3 8-hour rotations starting at 6 a.m, 2 p.m, and 10 p.m, so that unlike a traditional residential development, they do not conflict with peak morning and evening traffic movements. Many of those employed will be local. I'll now hand over to Hannah Pearce, the planning consultant, to detail further.
Thank you. The principle of development on this site is well established, with it being allocated in the neighbourhood plan excuse me, and benefiting from extant planning permission. The provision of specialist accommodation is supported generally by planning policy. The care home would provide the equivalent of 28 new houses, including by freeing up family housing locally, which would boost the council's housing supply. This is more than double that provided by the extant permission and more than half of the 50-unit target currently for Kingsclear. In line with the well-publicised rise in the ageing population nationally, our assessment has shown a shortfall of care provision locally, with a current undersupply of 115 beds within the catchment, and that increases to 269 by 2031. There is no care home serving Kingsclear currently, and there are none other than this one planned. The proposal offers a number of other significant benefits, including employment opportunities, contributions to the local economy and savings for the taxpayer, including reducing bed blocking and reliance on hospital services. We did visit with the Parish Council to obtain their views before submission, and we've also worked hard on the design with your officers, taking the scheme through several iterations to make it acceptable. The building will sit at a similar level to and distance from the adjacent houses, so as not to have an overbearing impact, and the elevations have been designed to break up scale and massing. The building is sited so that the 3 mature trees at the front of the site are retained, and provisions are made to enhance biodiversity, including through a management plan for the established woodland at the back of the site. The trees along the boundary with the A339 are retained to provide screening, and the care home is provided with landscaped amenity gardens, providing mitigation against any potential impact on the local landscape. The provision of 18 parking spaces is slightly over provision of standards of 1 space per 3 beds, and spaces are used by staff and visitors only, as residents don't have cars. Your highways team have no objections. Members will also be aware that there is local support for the proposals, and you will recall Debbie Palmer, who attended the site visit last week. She lives immediately adjacent to the site in Faulkner Road and is very supportive of our care home. She had registered to speak this evening, but was unfortunately unable to attend, but she did ask that I reference her own experience, where she has struggled to find suitable care locally for elderly relatives, and considers that this care home would be better than housing on the site, allowing locals to remain living in Kingsclear, close to support networks when their care needs increased. That view is shared by others in Faulkner Road, arguably those most directly affected, many of whom who have written to you. We commend this application to you for approval in line with officer recommendation, where there are no outstanding objections from statutory consultees and all technical considerations are deemed acceptable, and the care home meets an identified local need whilst also contributing to housing numbers locally. There is significant local support for this proposal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yep. A question on noise mitigation. I use this road every time I come to Basingstoke, and it's probably one of the most busiest junctions in the borough because of the Aldermaston crossroad. And the road average speed is 50 miles an hour. That's a maximum, but I'd suggest it's the average. So if you've got a palliative care home, you obviously want some quite gentle environment. How do you think this will fit in with that?
So obviously, when the care home is designed with that in mind, we submitted a noise impact assessment with the proposals, and the building fabric itself is the first step, I suppose, in any noise mitigation that's required. There is also a proposed condition from your officers in relation to noise levels, which clearly would need to be complied with as part of any pre-commencement conditions. So does that hopefully answer the question?
Thank you.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome tonight. Okay, it's nice to just to see the applicants. Okay, because having been around Kingsclear, I haven't seen the applicants before. I just want to talk about the shift pattern that you mentioned. So you mentioned that there are 3 shifts. Could you please explain a little bit more about the shifts? Okay, the timings. Okay, how many people are going to be on each shift, and how the 18 car parking spaces will cope at shift changeover time? Because I'm very, very concerned, okay, that Falkner Road and Coppice Road opposite are not impacted by any, okay, staff changes to the car, coming into the car park, and also for visitors.
Is that, okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I guess that's the sort of general pattern. So we develop for various operators. So we are not the operator of the care home. So we develop for various operators, Order of St John, KUK, Anchor, and people like that. So they will have their own bespoke strategy. But I suppose the rule of thumb, they tend to split into those kind of 3 shift patterns that I sort of outlined in terms of the 6 a.m., 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. There is sort of up to 18 full and part-time jobs created directly on site as a result of this application. And I suppose in terms of maximum numbers, I don't know if we have a kind of maximum number that sort of detail would normally be on site, but it's not going to be the 18 at any one time. It would be less than that split between those shifts. There'll be less overnight and more during the day. And then they clearly would not have a position where everybody vacates the home at the same point, because there needs to be a continuous staff presence on site to keep the residents safe and secure. So I don't have the exact numbers because we're not the operator, being honest, but that is generally how it kind of works in terms of the shift pattern, the number of staff. There's 18 full and part-time jobs created as part of this, and so we're comfortable that the parking level accords with the way this home would generally operate, and it's been shown to accord with other applications and care homes in the area and the wider part of the country.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take my second question, if I may. Again, just returning to the subject of car parking, okay, so you're saying that there are 18 full and part-time vacancies, okay, or job opportunities here, okay, split across the 3 shifts, okay. The fact that you've actually developed 50, okay, care homes, you said yourself, okay, you must have more idea than just say we're not the operator, okay, regarding this. I want to know, okay, are we going to be able to contain all the staff that are working there, plus any ambulances or any funeral directors, private ambulances that will attend the site, okay, and make sure that there is no overspill onto Falkner Road, which, as you've probably seen yourselves, okay, there is a lot of on-road parking, okay, and it's very difficult to negotiate, and also, that there'll be no spillover onto Coppice Hill, which again is, normally got on-street parking and very difficult to negotiate.
So as part of the proposals, our transport consultants carry out capacity figures for the car parking, and they are assured, and the highways team are assured, that the level of parking for a 50-bed care home is acceptable. In terms of kind of ambulances, etc., there's a separate ambulance bay. So the 18 spaces is for car parking, and that includes 2 disabled parking spaces, again in accordance with standards. And then there's a separate drop-off bay to be used for those other vehicles, as you suggest. Obviously, some people will be walking to the site in terms of those who are employed and those who are visiting. And as Sam said, the numbers that were arrived at in terms of the parking spaces are based on the 1 space per 3-bed prescribed standards, but also experience nationally, where all 50 residents won't have a visitor at any one time, not all at the same time, I should say. So we're happy that where we've got to on the parking levels, and that is, as I say, in line with how others operate. And as I say, your highways team have confirmed that they are accepting of the level of parking.
Thank you. Councillor Morrow.
Just a question on whether your residents will be using the GP service locally, and also, do you link in with the social care? Will you be getting? Is it all private residents, or will you take residents? Yeah.
So that's usually specific to the operator themselves in terms of exact levels, but there would usually be a mix of both private and social care residents on site. And in terms of the use of the GP surgery, so where residents come locally, they would obviously retain, usually, again, would retain their current GP where they're registered. Sometimes with care homes, there will be a set time each week where the GP will come on site to visit residents at the home and see a number of those at the same time. And obviously there are links with the local GP practices and hospitals in terms of the care that is being provided to residents. Absolutely, that's all linked up with the services within the borough, yeah.
I know you're not the builders. Do you have an idea of the level of, how high? 'Cause generally, you go to the cheapest care home. That's where most people end up if they're not private. So do you know where this care home's going to stand?
Yeah, so we're not the operator, but clearly what we're proposing here is a high quality facility that is the best in class, intentionally delivering high quality accommodation for people to benefit. It ranges based on the operator in terms of how they operate, as Hannah said. We work with a lot of not-for-profit organisations like Order of St John, Greensleeves Trust and people like that who have a split of private and publicly funded beds. So the publicly funded fees will be set by the locality. In terms of the other, the private fees, they will be dictated by the private pay market. I don't have those fees to hand, but they'll be certainly on a par with other sort of new homes that are in Basingstoke and Newbury, because Kingsclear clearly doesn't have a care home, so they'll be on a par with the fees that are payable in those locations.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Going back a little bit to effectively site access vehicle movements, I wonder whether we could put up the block plan, please. So, again, on this site, you said, well, we read you've got room for a refuse vehicle to manoeuvre, you've got room for a separate ambulance bay, and obviously you've got the parking to the front. Deliveries, and how will you manage, or how will you accommodate deliveries that will potentially come at the same time, they're not controlled, of food and provisions and care materials that come in relatively large vehicles, but not articulated. I can understand that one. So if you could just sort of explain on your site how it would accommodate, if you like, a yard or a service bay or something. Thank you.
So there is a delivery bay to the south of the building as you're looking at the plan, where the access road goes the spur off into the up towards the care home. So that's the servicing and delivery bay, and those would be. I don't know if it's on there. Those would absolutely be controlled at certain agreed times of the day. They're not ad hoc deliveries. They come at set times and that would obviously be agreed with the operator, and those are in line with kind of sociable, if that's the right word, hours. They wouldn't be coming at all hours of the night and day. And those, as I say, those would be timed specifically so that the members of staff and the management of the management team at the care home know when they're coming and to allow for that. But there is a specific reversing bay, and that would be for servicing deliveries and refuse collection, which is dealt with through a private operator.
Just building on that then, are you suggesting the vehicles have to enter the site backwards, or I can't sort of see if they could turn around to go in forwards and turn round, service, and then come out forwards? It just seems very tight.
Yeah, so I don't know if we've got the tracking plan itself, but the tracking has been done. So the vehicle, would enter the site in a forward gear and go up to the right, up towards the trees, and then reverse back up into the service bay, and then come down and back out again. So they would enter and leave the site in a forward gear. Does that? Yeah. The tracking has been carried out, and obviously highways have looked at all of that and signed it off, so to speak.
Okay. Any more questions? Councillor Court.
Good evening. Can you tell me, you'll be using local GP services. Are you sure they've actually got the capacity to serve this area?
So as we sort of mentioned, the residents coming to the care home, a lot of them will already be registered with GPs locally because they will be coming from the local area. So there's not a vast influx of new requirements, if that's the right word, for registering with the local GP practices. But as I say, the care home would work in partnership, in conjunction with those local GP surgeries, to make sure that the care afforded to the residents is the right level. But the idea with the care home, with it being, it is end-of-life care, and it's for when people's care needs increase to a level where the vast majority of their care will be dealt with within the site and on site by the nurses and the staff obviously employed, but as I say, with GP visits during the week.
That makes the assumption that the people who are going to be in the residence here are all local people, doesn't it?
Not necessarily all, but the vast majority will be from the local area. It's the experience of how this works.
Thank you. Any more questions for the speakers? Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Our borough, and you've seen in the not the conditions, the informatives, has a climate emergency. So you've got a 50-bed house. Are you going to be aiming for carbon neutrality and go above and beyond?
Yeah, so we aim to hit a higher level. We've removed all gas boilers and things like that in our care homes that we deliver, even though it's not quite there yet for care homes. Residential is obviously earmarked for those changes. We've gone above and beyond and we have implemented that as a matter of course. Obviously the facilities and the specification of the home it's all brand new, so it is certainly at a high level that means sustainable measures can be hit and thermal accreditations are high, etc. And yeah, that I suppose the final detail will be developed if we are able to gain consent as the construction sort of package is developed. But yeah, we certainly aim to achieve a high level.
Thank you. I don't see any new hands up, so thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Bowes.
Yeah, we were told that other homes in Hampshire have been granted permission with this level of parking. Do we know if it's been an issue in the neighbourhoods of those homes after they were built?
I'm afraid I don't have any specific information regarding the operation of any other such homes. That's not the information I have before me. I mean, I would highlight that it is typical to have a lower parking provision within such facilities, whether they are care homes or any form of that sort of residential sort of institution. And our parking SPD does allow for parking to be determined on a case-by-case basis. So, of course, as the speakers have indicated, they are knowledgeable in this area and they have developed a level of parking which they indicate goes over and beyond of what they would otherwise expect us to provide. And I shall also appreciate we haven't had any objection from Hampshire Highways on parking provision.
Councillor Falconer.
Yes, I have a question. I'm not quite sure who can answer this. I've been involved in 4 neighbourhood plans in Evingard. They all consider the needs of the elderly, but none of them have got palliative care facilities in them. So how do we as a borough normally expect palliative care facilities to be built or come forward? Or is it just windfall development?
It does tend to be those windfall projects that come forward in front of us. I mean, we do have policy CN4 within our local plan that does allow for specialist housing and for older persons care. So we do have a policy that considers it at a borough level. Obviously, within the neighbourhood plans, they have their individual policies where, of course, this particular neighbourhood plan does have a policy that does consider elderly care, but not necessarily palliative care. But again, part of that may be down to the operator of the building at the end of the day as well.
Councillor Morrow.
So to go back to the Kingsclear Parish Council speaker, they were concerned that they weren't consulted when this application came about and it was departing from the neighbourhood plan. Can you explain why they weren't, why the planning team didn't contact them?
So, I mean, firstly, in terms of when the planning application came in, we would have done our own statutory consultation in any event, which includes consultation to the parish council. Prior to an application coming in, then, of course, any local community consultation with the parish or local residents is in the gift of the applicant or their agent. So it's not a statutory requirement, but I understand from the information that I have that there has been a level of public consultation. Obviously, it may not have been quite to the detail that maybe they would have otherwise wanted, but of course there has been public consultation adapted over the last few years to accommodate the COVID pandemic. So there has been public consultation, but again, the detail of that, I'm afraid I don't have.
Just following up, did seem like we had 2 different versions. Parish Council saying that they hadn't really been consulted by the care home, and then the care home spoke and said that they had consulted. So I don't know how we can clear that up, whether I've missed something. But
I'm afraid I don't have the precise detail of what consultation took place.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Question to officers. I'd like an answer about weighting, please. Okay, and how much weight should we put to the Kingsclear neighbourhood plan in the fact that while this site is up for development, they specifically wanted, okay, small homes for elderly care. How much weight should we give to that, okay, in the current circumstances? Thank you.
I mean, the weighting is a matter for members to consider. At the end of the day, this proposal is proposing housing, but in a different form. So, of course, that would contribute to our housing land supply matter at a borough level. Obviously, the type of housing that's coming forward is different to what has been envisaged within the neighbourhood plan, and, of course, different to that which has already been granted outline planning permission. And, of course, that outline planning permission is still extant. In terms of the way, again, it's a matter for members on how we actually consider this going forward. But at the end of the day, we need to afford weight to the provision of housing. We have that issue, we have a requirement to deliver housing. This is just a slightly different form of housing, which we have to consider on its own merits.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to parking, I'm afraid. So I'm hearing that we have taken the parking space numbers on a reasoned argument from the developer that that's what they provided in the past at other sites. My question really is, we've learned there could be 18 on-site jobs. Now, they may not all come by car. They're going to be visiting doctors from different practices. There are going to be probably hairdressers, all these sort of facilities that come in. And there are 50 people in there who no doubt will have visitors. And those people will probably want to visit their loved ones as much as they can, or, well, I would hope they would. So the point is, how did we assess that 18 parking spaces is enough, given we've got potentially 50 visitors at any one time, we've got 18 people on site, we've got shift changes, and we've got visiting professionals. Now, I just don't see how the maths add up. I'd just like to understand how we feel it's acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. I think it's really in the sense of, I think we could probably have a debate all evening in terms of what we anticipate would be a potential scenario around who is likely to turn up. I think the key thing is bringing it back to the planning decision, which is against, obviously, the council's adopted policies, and what the parking supplementary planning document requires. It actually specifically says to be determined on a case-by-case basis, demonstrated by transport assessment, transport statement or travel plan as appropriate, survey data of comparable sites and explanation of anticipated car levels relating to the particular care model being proposed will be required. So that is our adopted position on these types of care facilities as to how that, if you like, method of calculation of parking should go. What has been submitted with the planning application is a transport assessment which compares different sites in the South East area. I understand that that's gone through that process. That's been reviewed by Hampshire Highways, who have determined that there's no objection to that level. Now, beyond that, we can't provide any more detail as to specifically what is likely to happen on a specific point in time. But I think the point the applicant was seeking to make was that it isn't likely that you're going to have 50 visitors all at one time and all 18 employees all at the site at the same time. There will be turnover, and I guess the key point is the reason why the SPD works in this way is that site by site there will be different experiences, and it's a better knowledge base, if you like, to have actually compared it to real examples as opposed to having an arbitrary standard, given that there are different variables compared to standard residential units where you've got a simple bedrooms, number of bedrooms equals a certain number of spaces.
Councillor Frost, second question.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is my final question on this particular application. I have to say, Mike, I disagree with you. At Christmas and Easter and the bank holidays, I think there will be a lot of visitors. However, what I'd like to know, is what is the distance from the 339, to the first part of the splay, for the junction, and bearing in mind the fact that there was a very serious accident there just this last week, at that junction. What do our colleagues from Hampshire say that they're going to do to actually mitigate it? And I note they're not here yet again to answer questions from councillors. Thank you.
Councillor Frost, we're not going to have the specific distance if it's not already set out in the report. I think the key thing is that when Hampshire look at the application, they look at it in its totality. So the transport assessment will consider all of those aspects. It will consider the parking, trip generation, access, visibility, and we would have an objection from Hampshire if it was felt that there was an issue there. I take the point about proximity in terms of it's the first turn off when you come off the 339. Absolutely understand that, but they would be looking at that from a highway safety perspective. And in my experience of Hampshire County Council, the objection will come if there is a highway safety concern. That will be at the top of their list, if you like, in terms of how they would respond to a planning application. So if there was a concern there, they would have certainly raised it in their consultation.
Thank you. Any more questions for officers? No? In that case, debate. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I struggle with this application, because I'm torn. I understand, that it's on a site which is recommended for housing in the Kingsclear neighbourhood plan, and I'm also, I recognise the fact that there are job opportunities, which are being generated there, which is fantastic for a small town that's outlying Basingstoke. However, my concern is, one, the level of parking. I don't think it's sufficient, bearing in mind the fact that we have Faulkner Road, which is right next to it, and often, even during the day, okay, there are very few passing places on what is effectively, due to car parking, a single track road, okay, going down there. So I'm struggling to understand where any extra parking will be. Okay, we can see here that there was there's a very short distance, okay, and there was a very severe accident, okay, on the first part of crossing the junction here. So you know, and it is the first turning. So I'm struggling. I would love to say, yeah, let's get it on. Let's build these houses. Let's develop this site, okay, but you know, I'm really struggling because I just can't see, okay, how the parking can be sufficient, okay. Coppice Road on the other side, okay, is a fairly steep hill, okay, and again, that's very residential, and there are cars on it, okay, all day, every day. People don't tend to park on their drives because they're too steep. They tend to park on the road, which is less steep, okay. So, you know, there's just no available parking infrastructure, okay, that's in and around the site. As I know it, okay, as the ward councillor, the only parking infrastructure that is available, okay, will be up at the Fieldgate Centre, which will be a good 20-minute walk away, okay, on the other side of town, okay, because the car park in the town centre is just chock-a-block. So I'm really struggling on this, okay. I want to approve it, okay, I really do, but I just can't because of the parking, and I haven't been reassured, unfortunately, by the applicant. I appreciate that there are 18 job opportunities, but there seems to be 18 car parking spaces. So they're saying that effectively there is no room on site for visitors, okay, who will come to actually spend the final moments with their loved ones, and I just think that there's just not enough parking on there. Okay, that's all, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. I've got speakers. I've got myself, Councillor Freeman, Councillor Harvey, and then Councillor Morrow. The situation with the housing, there is the extent planning, but that operative has said they're not going forward with it. So we're not looking at, do we want houses or do we want a care home? The housing is effectively off the table. What we're actually being asked is this care home reasonable in planning terms? And the biggest issues appears to be traffic and parking. And probably like quite a lot of us in here, I've had a elderly relative in a care home, and strangely enough, it was a give or take a 50-bedroom care home. I visited that care home at all times of day and evening, and I don't think there were 18 car parking spaces there. I never counted them. I never had trouble parking there. How many people visit their loved ones? Roughly, if you've got 50 bedrooms, you've got 18 parking spaces, that's 1 in 3. Well, you're not there all day. People are there at different times of day, different times of the evening. Deliveries come. So I never had a problem parking. So I don't really see a big issue with the parking. Other than that, the distance from the 339, I can't answer Councillor Frost's question. I haven't measured it, but it's enough. In my mind, having been on the site viewing, it's sufficient. Other than that, it's directly next to a built-up area. It's already, the principle of developing that area has already been decided, and it's quite low-lying, so it quite fits in. Those are my thoughts. We'll see where it goes. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. Just to add my personal experience to that, I've worked in a lot of care homes, and unfortunately it is the case that most relatives just dump their relatives in there and leave them to it. You will get your few, there's a core of about, say, half a dozen people that will visit every day or maybe 2 or 3 times a week, but the vast majority of those residents in there, they don't see anyone from Easter to Christmas. And even on Easter and Christmas, some of them will be taken away to visit with relatives, so the parking won't be an issue. But a lot of these poor, unfortunate souls basically get chucked in there by their relatives that don't want to bother with them, and they're there until they pass away. It's unfortunate, but honestly, the parking really, I think you are vastly overestimating how many parking spaces you will need in there. It's, 18 would certainly be, I'd say, sufficient for 50 beds. And with the staffing, there's only going to be a maximum of, if my maths is right, 12 staff on site at any time, and that's only for the changeover. So you'll have 6 people on each shift. If it's 18 over the space of the 3 shifts, you've got 6 people on each shift. The maximum at changeover will be 12 people, so you've still got extra parking spaces there for anyone else. I really don't think the parking is going to be an issue, and I think we do need this sort of palliative care home. There isn't one in the vicinity where we need some in the borough. I think we should approve this.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. We've got to look at the application that's in front of us, and we've got to look at it in the context of our actual policies and the comments that we have from our various statutory consultees, whether we like them or not. And it is an issue that Hampshire aren't here this evening, as they aren't here every evening. And I want to thank our officers for doing their job of actually trying to fill in for Hampshire in that regard. I just think we've got to be careful here. There was an outline planning permission for 13 houses approved. Those vehicles that would have been part of that application, were it to be built out, with given outline principle, would access out of this site, onto that road, onto that junction. That point has been conceded. The point about whether or not it's appropriate as a use is part of the equation and part of the weight to consider. And this is residential, but it's residential in a different form. And while the parish council has created a neighbourhood plan where they have a specific policy of what they would like to see in older care, that didn't go as far as palliative. It didn't go as far as the specific care being provided by this application. That's an issue to they consider in policy going forward, but right here, right now, that isn't there. It's a specific policy as was alluded to, as was described. We have a policy in the borough. We have an issue of having a policy where we specifically need this kind of facility. So we have the evidence in the borough of the need now for a facility like this. We also have, in 2015, our SHMAR, as it refers to, the Strategic Housing Assessment, that says that need's going to increase. Therefore, it isn't a case of fulfilling a demand. The demand itself is going to increase. So in that context, we actually have need proven across the borough. And we are sat here as a borough planning committee. So we have to respond to that policy. The parking arrangements, I think, are quite clear. There is no policy ground on which you could sustain an objection on parking on the basis of the transport study that's been undertaken, because there's no evidence to counter it. If there was evidence to counter it from the county council, then we might have a leg to stand on in seeking a rejection of it. But you're not going to win on that were this to be taken to appeal. In terms of consultation, it's a nice to have. And I know that, but in the context of what they've done, I think it's inadequate. And I think that is a point that the developer should have thought of in far better consultation, not only with the parish council, but with local residents. You did a bit, but you should have gone a lot further. I think that's fair. So that's a criticism, that's one you're going to have to take on the chin. And if you are approved this evening, I think you've got a job of work to do with the local parish and with the residents to make sure that you do a much better job post-submission. And you can do that. That's in your gift to do. So please take that away as an informative at very least. But again, it's not a reason for rejection. And finally, in terms of our own policy, CN4 is applicable. We have a policy for specialist housing. That's the hat on which I would hang this. And I personally would move approval as the basis of the officer's recommendation this evening.
Thank you. It's been moved for approval. Is there a seconder? Councillor Howard Sorrell. Thank you. Councillor Morrow, do you wish to speak?
Right. I've been through this and I've listened to the speakers today, and I would move to reject. There is limited space in Kingsclear. They've gone to the trouble of doing a neighbourhood plan, and we are in danger of setting a precedent where they've spent the time in the middle would affect the other site. There is a landscape objection, and personally looking at it, it is a very had housing on the site from all over the place. So, you know, my objection is with landscape and the balance between, if we go ahead with the care home, we are going against the neighbourhood plan. I don't see how you can't take into account the things we're losing, which is the housing. And this is small housing for local people in the village. And reading through and listening to the comments and what they've come to say today, they haven't really defended those points. So that's my motion. So cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Morrow. I can't accept your motion because we've already got a motion on the table. We've got to vote on the existing motion, and if that then fails, you can put your motion forward. Oh, sorry, apparently I've missed two speakers. Councillor Howard Sorrell, followed by Councillor Tomlin. I missed those.
Yes, I'm Chair. Nobody can accuse us of not being thorough with this application, for sure. I think it's fine. I think Councillor Morrow has summed it up very well. There are lots of small things, but for planning you need one or two large concrete reasons that you can point to and say this is the specific reason. You can't just throw lots of little things at the wall and hope that they cobble together.
Your application, yeah, I can understand Basingstoke's need, but I don't see, well, I see it as rather large for its site, and I agree with the landscape assessment and that because the building is a little large for its site. Now, if it was a bit smaller on its site, but we can't really discuss that, but if it was, there'd be more parking actually is bad, then you've got to do something about it. We can't do that. A clear-cut decision, and I think it's a weighted decision, and I think I'm on, well, anyway. So you go to the vote.
Thank you. 5. Yeah, and those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'll make that. That is refused. Catherine. Motion to refuse it. Councillor Frost. Sorry, please do. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor...
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify that even though that motion's lost, it was just to clarify that it doesn't have to be a motion for refusal. It could be a motion for deferral, for example, if there was an outstanding issue in relation to the matter around parking. So I'm just making that point that is an option open to the committee.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I think there was a motion actually democratically put to the committee, okay, and that was very specific. It didn't involve delaying the decision. It was very much to refuse the planning application.
Councillor Morrow, could you repeat your motion if you feel so inclined?
Right. So it's on, the main objection is on landscape. The site is too small. But there's also an extra to it, which is a little, probably requires a bit of help, because it's all to do with you've got the national policy framework. You know, you have the reasons to depart from that, and the neighbourhood plan's there, and in my opinion, the care home application in lots of ways when you add them all up, it's significant and it's demonstrably harmful for the application when you take into account the fact that the plan is to build small homes on that site, and that the care home would put a problem in there. So, not being experienced in motions, I don't know if I can pass it on to a more experienced councillor.
Chair, I understand there's one clear reason for refusal in the motion in relation to impact on landscape. In relation to impact on neighbourhood plan, what the committee would have to consider is, as set out in the papers, the weight to be given to that existing neighbourhood plan policy, which is diminished because of the 5-year housing land supply position. That's very clear in the report, so it's even taking that into account, and the fact that that housing policy has diminished weight, that you are still nevertheless convinced that that is a substantial reason for refusal in coming forward. So that would be two reasons for refusal, one of which is the landscape impact, if I've understood the motion correctly, and the second is a principal point of it being contrary to the neighbourhood plan, simply on the basis of it being a different type of residential development, even with that diminished weight and the very clear position set out in the officer's report in that regard.
And just to add to that, in the fact that Kingsclear is desperate for homes and has a small amount of space available to build those homes.
We've got a motion for refusal. Is there a seconder? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. The only thing I would also potentially add, okay, should Councillor Merrow wish to add it, is that I think it's also contrary to Section 111 of the MPPF. Okay, but I'm quite happy if Councillor Merrow doesn't want to go for that, and I'm quite happy that it's EM1, okay, and the local plan. Thank you.
And Councillor Morrow, the standard practice in the fact that the Section 106 agreement hasn't been included, that would also be a reason for refusal in most cases. So it would be for you to consider whether that should also be included. So it'd be 3 reasons for refusal.
Thank you. We haven't been moved for refusal for the reasons given. Those in favour of refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those against refusal? 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Paul hasn't got his hand up.
Abstention.
Paul's abstained. Thank you. Application is refused. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just reiterate that application has been refused for 3 reasons. So the first being the impact on the landscape, the second being the contrary to the neighbourhood plan due to the different type of housing proposed for the site, and the third being the absence of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Item number 2, the Glade Common Road, Headley. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. As indicated, this application is for land at the Glade, Common Road, Headley. The proposal seeks full planning permission for the erection of 2 detached dwellings with associated parking and amenity space as a backland form of development, making use of a large rear garden. If I bring members' attention to the update paper, members will note that there is an update to the planning history for the site, details of the viewing panel, and 2 additional informatives which relate to SIL. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions and informatives as listed within your report. Many thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. If we could have our first speakers, which is Mr. Butler and Mr. Watherspoon. Good evening to you. You have 4 minutes between you. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the button is on the console in front of you.
My name is Colin Butler. My family has resided in Rosedean Common Road since it was built in 1961. With me is Dr. Mark Wotherspoon, has lived in the area for some 30 years, previously GP principal at the Health Centre in Kingsclear for some 20 years. We object to the proposed development for the following reasons. One, it is overdevelopment on a backland site which is completely contrary to the rural character of the Common Road community and continues the trend towards the urbanisation of a small group of well-separated and varied dwellings in a countryside setting. Two, it is contrary to the local plan policy SS6, new housing outside of settlement policy boundaries. It is not appropriate to the site's context, it does not meet any locally agreed need, and it is unsympathetic to the character of the local landscape. It is noted that the case report concedes that the proposal does not comply with policy SS6. Three, it is contrary to the parish neighbourhood plan, which is out for public referendum tomorrow. It does not preserve the rural character of the parish, and it is not located on a brownfield or infill site. And crucially, it does not comply with the plan's housing policy HD1, which is specifically predicated on the local planning authority's meaningful implementation of local plan policy SS6. If, as is suggested in the case report, the subject development does not comply with SS6 but is approved anyway, what will the local residents be voting for tomorrow when the key link component of the neighbourhood plan's housing policy is not being supported by the council? And four, it will result in the significant loss of privacy and amenity to the existing houses of Little Holdrops, formerly Melverdene, and Rosedean. It is proposed to construct a narrow vehicle corridor running down the full length of the side boundary to Little Holdrops, separated from the dwelling's front, side and rear gardens by just a timber fence. The access then turns to effectively run down the whole of the rear garden boundaries to both properties. Notwithstanding a token area of indicative planting, it will be impossible for the two dwellings to avoid the inevitable noise, disturbance and pollution. Together, the two houses will be surrounded on all four sides by vehicle access areas. To suggest that this is acceptable development in a rural countryside setting is frankly baffling. Mark.
Could you put microphone, please?
Not only is this an objection from local residents, but I firstly refer you to the letter of objection already submitted from the Parish Council. I trust you have all seen this and taken note of its contents. In addition, I refer you to Ken Rattican's concerns, and I quote, "I would like to reiterate my concerns about this application in that should the application be approved, it will result in a cramped and overdeveloped site whilst opening up the prospect of back garden development within the parish. It would also not respect the street scene of Common Road and add an incongruous element to an attractive street within the village." Finally, I refer to the Council's Landscaping Department's report, and I quote, "So-called backland developments within the rural outskirts of Headley have been approved in the past, which has resulted in the loss of landscape character and the urbanisation of the countryside. It is felt that the proposal would be detrimental to this rural character due to an overdevelopment of the site. The size and mass of the proposed would impinge on properties along Common Road, especially the properties of Melverdene and Rosedean, impacting on their rural location. It is interesting to note that as soon as the application for two houses was approved, there was an immediate reapplication for a third house to be built on the same plot. I accept this may not be directly relevant to this discussion today, but I think it does show the intent of the application and the potential direction of travel, setting a disconcerting precedent. In summary, therefore, you have local residents objecting to this development, you have the parish council objecting, you have the council's own landscaping department objecting, and you have one of your very own ward councillors, all objecting to this application. In fact, the only people wanting this application to go ahead is an out-of-area development company for reasons that I think are fairly obvious. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions for the speakers? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Obviously, your neighbourhood plan is going to referendum, but we can give it weight in terms of the fact that it's drafted, and we can consider it at least in those terms. Could you tell me, because you've referred to it, what in your neighbourhood plan gives you the sense that it's outside, this application sits outside it? If you could help me understand that, I would appreciate it.
Microphone, please.
I beg your pardon. On page 38 of the neighbourhood plan, under the title Housing and Other Development Policy HD1, Location and Scale of New Development, the salient point would read, the area outside any settlement policy boundary, which is relevant to this particular application, is considered to be countryside where the local plan policy, SS6 and national policies apply. There is supporting text which basically says BDBC have confirmed that there will, however, be ongoing opportunities for small-scale development in suitable locations, largely on infill plots. This is a backland plot, not an infill plot. Smaller, more affordable homes of 1 to 3 bedrooms are envisaged. This is a development for very large square footage detached dwellings, which undoubtedly will cost many hundreds of thousands of pounds on the retail market. This type of development was supported by local people responding to the household questionnaire.
Thank you. Any more questions for the speakers? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Just very...
Okay. Councillor Frost, anybody else with any questions? No. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Taylor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the speaker button is on the console.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, councillors. As your officer has introduced, and had already been, we had already actually been in receipt of planning permission on this site. However, there was obviously an error, an administrative error with respect to the call-in from Councillor Rattigan, and all of you have had the opportunity necessarily, that this is a very sizable plot of land which is very secluded and ideally suited for 2 new houses. I think it's fair to say, and I don't want to put words into his mouth because he's not here today, but Councillor Rattigan even remarked when he entered into the site that, yeah, in different lights, things look different. And I won't say any more than that because it's not my place to. These houses do occupy a backland position, but as you will have seen when you went to the site, much of the actual older housing stock in this locality is backland, and as is shown on that location plan you can see now. A lot of the housing along the road frontage is newer. It's not exclusively newer, but in terms of the more historic context of the site, the backland development, the houses that are there to either side of the plot, is the more historic character. In this respect, therefore, the proposal would entirely conform to the established character along this part of Common Road, contrary to what you've heard today. In terms of views from the highway, due to the very nature of the site, you would appreciate that these houses are not particularly visible at all within the street scene. Furthermore, given both the retained boundary planting and the new proposed boundary planting, wider views of the houses would be extremely limited. We entirely support the recommendation of your officer and concur that given the significant separation distances involved, the houses would not result in any material overlooking nor loss of privacy for any existing residents beyond the level that would not normally be otherwise typically anticipated in such a well-established residential area as this. To this end, I would reiterate that the presence of existing houses behind houses on Common Road is an original feature of the character of this part of Headley. As part of our commitment to sustainable development, all of our new houses are powered by a combination of air source heat pumps and solar power, supported by battery wall technology. This enables our houses to not only avoid fossil fuels, but also to deliver sustainable electricity back to the grid. The spacious nature of the site and the largely open aspect, particularly to the south and the west, allow for opportune conditions for us to use PV. And in particular. And so if councillors would like to see precise details of that, whilst we do it as a developer anyway, we'd be more than happy for a suitably worded condition to be added. Whilst I am the agent for this planning application and a planner by profession, I am also a local resident to this area and walk in the area very, very often. And I strongly believe that delivering smaller sustainable developments within existing residential areas of our towns and villages such as this is crucial to avoiding otherwise the loss of open countryside on larger scale greenfield sites, which would obviously drastically alter the appearance of the village and lead to significant habitat loss. This is a brownfield site, as you've seen from the photos, and it is a very sort of sensitive, secluded site to deliver two well-proportioned family homes. In this respect, I think the proposal will help ease the pressure on the village to deliver housing from countryside sites, and you will have seen a number of small windfall sites such as this, which I think are far more sensitive, far more sustainable, that have appeared in and around the village rather than large urban extensions, which I personally don't like to see. For these reasons, I would politely ask that you support your officer's recommendation this evening to grant planning permission for this sustainable development, which comprises 2 family houses. Thank you.
To the mic, thank you. Questions for the Speaker? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. You have clearly failed policy SS6E. That's clear in the paper, it's clear in the report. And admittedly, we have a 5-year housing land supply issue, and you will argue, no doubt, that of course that supersedes policy SS6, and we know that. However, we have to weigh the balance of all the policies set against how we would have judged it in the context and in the round. So we're doing that. So policy SS6E is clearly failed. Did you ever take account of the neighbourhood plan? You must know about it, because you brought your application through when it's coming through for referendum. So you must know that the neighbourhood plan's coming forward. Why in the world have you brought an application that clearly, according to the information we've heard this evening from the parish council, sits so far outside of their, hopefully, in their opinion, soon to be approved neighbourhood plan? Why do it in that regard?
Yes, as you rightly point out, I will certainly argue 5-year supply. There is a desperate housing need, there's a desperate housing shortage. In my view, as a professional planner, that is an overriding consideration. It genuinely is. There is a housing need here, full stop. We can take into account a plan that is being formed, but it's not yet fully adopted. I wouldn't necessarily say that we are in complete conflict with that plan. As you heard, it generally says that sites will be brought forward as infill, but it doesn't say exclusively these sites should be avoided or exclusively backland development should be avoided. In my view, if you read through the neighbourhood plan, the general thrust of that plan, which is to deliver smaller scale development in the right location on a sensitive basis in that village, my personal view is that we are in compliance with the general thrust of that plan and where it seeks to deliver housing. Fundamentally, for me, it's a question of delivering housing in a sustainable manner for the village rather than looking at greenfield allocation sites around the village.
Thank you. Any more questions for the Speaker? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? I have one, which is how much consideration should we give to the local plan in this, bearing in mind our housing land supply?
So in terms of our local plan, members will be familiar on how we consider our policies, for example, policy SS6, which forms part of our housing strategy, which we are addressing in less weight because of our housing land supply. So there we are, we are defaulting back to the MPPF. In terms of the neighbourhood plan, of course, we are affording weight to that because we are very close to the referendum tomorrow. The neighbourhood plan obviously places this site in the countryside still, and therefore in the neighbourhood plan we're defaulting back to policy SS6, which of course is part of the borough local plan, which we've just referred to.
Thank you. Councillor Morrow.
I noticed on the application, it's on the report, it's got seal payments attached, and it says greater than 100 metres squared. Do we know the size and roughly the sort of money that would be generated?
I can confirm that yes, it is required to pay seal because we're looking at more than one property here. I don't have the figures, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. If we could pop to the block plan, please. It says about waste bins. It's curbside collection. You've got to put your recycle and your grey bin outside. Is that a footpath, a footway or whatever, and will there be adequate room for bins to be located at the curbside without obstructing what would be a footpath? I didn't get to the viewing panel, so I apologise.
So as members will be aware that the area does operate the curbside collection. There is a condition within your report that refers to providing the provision within the curtilage of the property for refuse and recycling storage, plus provision for collection not more than 15 metres carrying distance from the highway, which is our standard approach to ensure there is adequate space and provision for refuge, storage and collection. So yes, there would have to be provision closer to the highway to enable that collection to take place, but again, we have got that condition for further details.
Any more questions for officers? In that case, yes, Councillor Howard-Sorrell.
This isn't necessarily an issue to consider for this application, but given that we might approve this, does that bind our hands for this 3-bedroom application that's going in? Are we going to be under more pressure to approve that? Or?
So each application is considered on its own merits, so this would have no bearing on the considerations of another application on the same site for a slightly different development. Again, that will be given its own due consideration.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. We heard the applicant say he would be willing to take a condition to ensure the provision of solar and heat pumps, etc. So are we able to do that, given that he's volunteered that?
I'm afraid, as we've reiterated previously, we don't actually have a policy that we can actually secure that against within our current local plan. However, if I refer members, I think it's in the report, page 111, there is reference to the latest building regulations, which as from June 2022, new residential properties must produce 30% less carbon dioxide emissions than previous standards. So the standards are already increasing, so there is opportunity there under building regulations to ensure energy efficiency within a new development. Again, it's not something we can condition through our planning policies.
Thank you. I see no more hands up for questions, so debate. If nobody, Councillor Falconer.
Yeah, my thoughts, following on from what Councillor Harvey said, you know, SS6, settlement policy boundary, neighbourhood plan, and bearing in mind the decision we took earlier, and I'd also add the size and width of these houses would seem to be quite large and take up the whole width of the plot. So I'm just struggling personally to see how one could approve that development given all those negatives.
Anyone else for debate? Okay. I'm looking at it, and there is a considerable amount of backland development around that area already. So it's not out of keeping with the street scene, if you want to call it that. So I will move the officer's recommendation for approval. Would anybody like to second it? Councillor Court, thank you very much. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? I'll make that 9. And those against? I take it we've got some, take the rest as abstentions then. Thank you. That is approved as per the officer's recommendation. Catherine.
Thank you. I will just reiterate that that application has been approved, and that will be subject to the conditions within the agenda before you, and also informatives within the agenda and on the update paper. Many thanks.
Point of order. I'd just like to have it noted in the minutes that I didn't abstain. I didn't vote because I had to leave the room. I'm under treatment for prostate cancer and had to relieve myself. So I apologise, committee, okay, and also apologise to my residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. I'm sure that'll be in the minutes. Right, item number 3, land adjacent to Knightsbridge Copse Lodge. Not Copse, Newbury Road, Headley. Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is an application at land adjacent to Bridge Lodge, Newbury Road in Headley. The proposal is for the erection of 8 dwellings comprising of 2 3-beds and 6 2-bed dwellings to be arranged in a linear row across the site. The dwellings would be constructed alongside the access, parking and turning area and associated gardens. The application is recommended for refusal as per the reasons provided in the case officer's report. In terms of the update, members were shown the site as part of the site visit. And in addition, I would just like to draw members' attention to the planning history for the site, where there was an application for the use of the land for the stationing of caravans for residential purposes and the erection of 4 utility rooms or day rooms. This application was refused under delegated powers, raising similar concerns to those expressed within this report, namely landscape, trees, biodiversity, noise and its location. And that application is subject to a planning hearing, which will take place very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. If we can have our first speaker, Mr. Cottrell. Good evening, Mr. Cottrell. You have 4 minutes, and I will warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Chair. As we've just heard, this application has 7 reasons why the officer wants to refuse the application, but most of them, in my view, are subjective. The first reason claims that the site is large scale and will introduce domestic paraphernalia into the area which would cause landscape harm. Yet within a short distance of the site, there are already dwellings and the large Four Kingdoms theme park. Further on in the report, it claims that there is a fence that's going to go around the boundary line, which is large and will block views into the site. Well, if this is the case, you won't be seeing the domestic items that are down as the item number 1. The development is for a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom dwellings, which are all minimal in size. This is hardly a large-scale development, and the application or the applicant didn't want to go down the road of applying for large units, which we could have done. Instead, we looked at the emerging neighbourhood plan, which does ask for smaller units, which is precisely what is being offered here. The emerging neighbourhood plan also talks about infill sites, as you were just talking here, and in my eyes, you know, this could be seen as an infill site between the development to the south and Four Kingdoms as a built form area. The Conservation Officer has stated in the report that in the absence of evidence to the contrary, it is considered that the proposal would change the setting of Knightsbridge House in a detrimental manner, but the external consultants that the applicants have used state that there is no harm to the listed building and the setting, which begs the question as to why do we have these reports done if they're not going to be taken on board. When you were on the, those of you that were on the viewing panel on Friday, you will have seen that the listed building is way off in the distance through some trees, and I think if you get your binoculars out, you might just see it. So does this actually cause any harm to the setting of that listed building? Again, in my eyes, it's a subjective thing. You can't see it in terms of, you know, on the slide there. 3 of the reasons for refusal are all based upon the removal of trees. But you will note that the vast majority of the trees are actually on the boundary lines to the site, and they're all being retained. There are 3 trees that are going to be within the gardens of the dwellings. The officers also claim that there will be pressure to trim these trees and remove them in the future as they grow. But this could be said that it's the same for all trees if they're not managed correctly. You will note that from the site plan that we are also proposing to maintain an area to the northern end of the site, which is closest to the watercourse at the bottom. That area is going to be turned over to a natural area for biodiversity. We will be proposing to actually plant 7 new trees and a large amount of new hedging. This area will then allow the wildlife to thrive in this area and maintain the links to any sinks and other important wildlife areas that are in the, that are surrounding the site. With regards to the loss of wet grassland, which is part and parcel of the biodiversity objection, obviously the land at the moment is agricultural land, so if a farmer decided they wanted to take on the land, this would be gone in any event. The last point I think I want to just talk about is in terms of the fencing that we talked about around the site. It's down as another reason for refusal right now, is that it would be out of keeping with the area. That fencing needs to be there from an acoustic point of view, which is put on board by the environmental health. So it's kind of a bit unreasonable in my eyes to say that we can't have the fence there, but we need the fence there to meet the sound levels. So the fence itself is actually inside the site with vegetation to provide screening. The listed building that we were talking about actually has a 2-metre high fence that's right on the boundary, and it's right up against the footpath and the main road. So how is an acoustic fence on our site not in keeping with the surrounding area? Lastly, obviously, dare I say it, is about the 5-year land supply and obviously tilted balance. In the officer's report, it has been only given limited weighting for the development of 8 dwellings, which in my eyes should be much higher than that. And the harms that have been identified, as I've said, but in my eyes are subjective, and therefore I believe that the benefits massively outweigh the harm. So, to conclude, this development, in my eyes, will cause minimal harm, but will deliver 8 dwellings in a sustainable location, which is in line with the neighbourhood plan and national policy, and I therefore ask you to please approve this application.
Thank you, Mr Cotterill. Right, questions for Mr Cotterill? No? Oh, Councillor Court, thank you.
Good evening. Can you please clarify considerations of the access of this site onto a very fast A339? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the access has actually previously been approved on an application back in 2018, I think it was, when I did that application. The entrance was actually there, and when resurfacing work happened, for some reason Hampshire County Council went across the front of it and didn't put the access back in, and it was kind of got rid of, which is why a previous owner asked me to look at putting in the new entrance, and obviously having that reinstated. When now, for this application, the Highways Department obviously asked for the visibility displays and also for slightly bigger radiuses actually entering into the site to demonstrate that the bin lorries and vehicles can get in and out. They came back with no objection to, to the actual entrance on that site. So I believe that would cover that off.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Morrow.
In the report, it says that some of the sites in flood zone 2 and flood zone 3, and then it says only 80%. And looking at the way it is, I'm wondering if you can sort of explain where that flood zone is, and does it affect the development at all?
Yeah, so if you, on the drawing that's there on the screen, if you see where the visitors' parking spaces are to the north, there is a dotted line that actually runs through. So it's everything north of the actual access road. That side is that's actually the line where it splits between flood zone 2 and 3. But it's also all the houses in terms of they're on the south side of the site, and it's actually up the hill. So the water course is down the hill at the bottom. All right. And there was the flood risk assessment. I think the flood people have said, Environment Agency, no objection.
Yeah. Anybody else with questions? Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, you went through very quickly about the. I appreciate you had a lot of points to cover. Okay, I want to talk about the impact on the Knightsbridge House, and I'd just like to explain again, please, in quite a lot of detail about the fencing, okay, and the mitigation that you're going to put in place, okay, to protect that grey listed building. Thank you.
Yeah, obviously 4 minutes is quite a short time, isn't it, to get a lot of points across, and I do speak pretty quick, so apologies. So basically, the way that I've seen this site and the impact on the listed building, the listed building has a 2-metre high fence that is all round their boundary. You can't see the listed building. Now, I know obviously officers will say that that's not necessarily all part to do with, if you can see it, then there is an impact on the setting, because I know it's the bigger picture. But the point that I wanted to get across is that the external consultants who obviously do this day in, day out, where they look at impacts on buildings and listed buildings, their assessment is that this will not cause any harm to that listed building and their setting, because we are maintaining as many of the trees around the site as is possible. You can't see that when you're on the site. You don't have views of the listed building. And in terms of the actual listed building itself, I don't know if you've got a block plan, but if you look at a block plan and the way it actually sits on the site, it's not on that one, is it? Because you can't see the actual listed the listed buildings to itself. But there's a cluster of other dwellings and things that are actually part of that. There's outbuildings. There's a number of other houses that are sat in and around that listed building. So it's quite contained in itself. And in the actual officer's report, the conservation officer doesn't necessarily say that they had an issue with the development. It was about the trees, and we're saying, well, actually, we're not removing that many trees. I'm proposing to keep some of those trees that are in the gardens because I believe that's acceptable, and I think that the overall setting, I don't believe will change, and nor do the external consultants. So does that have I answered or have I waffled? I don't know.
Councillor Frost, second question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, you answered it, okay, and you waffled, okay, so well done, okay. But I just want to pick up on your point about the trees, okay. How many trees are there on the site? How many are you looking to remove? And do any of the trees that you want to remove have TPOs on them?
Specific numbers, I can't give you exactly how many are there because there's a couple of groups where there's some smaller, G9, I think group 9 at the top there, and how many trees are actually in there and what's actually effectively almost scrub in terms of the way that it's grouped, so it all gets grouped together. As you can see there, I mean the site, you know, most of it is long grass. There are 3 or 4 trees that actually do need to go, in my view, that will be gone. One of them, yes, or 2 of them are category Bs. I'm looking at Luke at this point. But in terms of doing the, you know, taking those trees out, none of them have TPOs on. And obviously doing the mitigations in terms of the area to the north of the site, keeping that for the biodiversity side of things, planting new trees in there, the new suds pond that we're proposing to put in, to bring the biodiversity and the trees and stuff in the area back up to a level. Because obviously, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that development doesn't cause harm to trees and biodiversity, because obviously it does. But if you put up a garden shed, it still can have an impact. So it's weighing that back to tilted balance, weighing up the benefits of 8 new dwellings that are 2 beds and 3 beds in an area where it is called for in the emerging neighbourhood plan should be, in my view, given great weight against minimal harm. And I've tried not to waffle this time.
Thank you. Any more questions for Mr. Cottrell? I have one. The application for static caravan for caravans there, is that the same applicant, same landowner, and this is just an alternative scheme that's being put forward, or is it, you know, is there a change in the applicant?
No, so it's the same landowners, the same applicants. This is an alternative scheme to that. So yeah, all right.
No more questions, and thank you very much. Yeah, don't worry. We haven't been doing it for a little while now. No more speakers, so questions to officers. Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I just refer to my question. How many trees are actually on the site, do we know? Okay, and how many are actually going to be removed? We've heard from the applicant that none of the trees that he wants to remove are actually got TPOs. So I'm just concerned for the numbers. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Similar to Mr. Cottrell, in terms of actual physical numbers, I can't give you a specific, but in my report I refer to there's 3 significant trees, in my opinion, that will be removed towards the centre of the site, and I feel there'll be 3 further trees that will be detrimentally impacted by the construction of the dwellings and the use of the garden in terms of future occupants want to increase sunlight. So of note, in my opinion, significant trees, I believe there'll be 6. Or 6 trees and 6 groupings of trees. And then in terms of TPOs, you are correct, the trees on the site are not TPO'd, but once again, I'll reiterate, I think they add to the landscape value and character of the area and are significant features of the local area. I hope that helps. Thank you.
No more questions, in which case, debate. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. The applicant's agent is right. We do have to take into account the tilted balance. And on that basis, I go to page 139 and the biodiversity officer's comments. And this site, without any shadow of a doubt, by its proximity to the sink, by its relationship to the river, by the very fact of the site itself being a key habitat, identified in our own SPDs, it couldn't be any clearer, to be perfectly honest. And that's just one of the reasons the officers have given. But for me, it's the most important one. We've declared an ecological emergency. We are very clear in our planning policies where we stand on biodiversity. This application doesn't even come close. So from that perspective, I strongly oppose it on the basis of biodiversity alone. We recognise the any one local plan policy in terms of the neighbourhood plan and respect to the neighbourhood plan. There's the MPPF paragraph 175, again, couldn't be any clearer. And then our own policy, EM4. So the policy position is proven in that regard, in my opinion, having listened to the arguments and read the report. So I would move rejection, as the officers have recommended.
Yeah, been moved for rejection and we have a seconder, Councillor Frost. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to speak on it briefly? Councillor Morrow.
I actually think the most important part of this for biodiversity is the lower ground by the river. And if the application doesn't do enough to look after that wildlife corridor, then there's an issue. I can't actually tell myself if it does or not. I don't think the trees behind the site are anywhere near as important as the trees at the front and the wildlife corridor. It does say that they're going to have a SUD and they're going to look after that area. So I'm a little bit minded of how, you know, in that way. It's difficult to tell with that. It's definitely more important, the lower section of this development and keeping that wildlife corridor. That's all I wanted to add. Cheers.
Councillor Harvey, could you just clarify your reasons for refusal? Did it include the harm to the listed building or was it purely on biodiversity?
My arguments were around biodiversity, but I moved the officers' recommendations as said.
Thank you. Been moved and seconded for refusal as per the officer's recommendation. Those in favour of refusal? I'll make that 10. And those against refusal? No, and Councillor Morrow's abstaining. So that is refused. Luke.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application is refused in accordance with the officer's recommendation and the reasons for refusal at the beginning of the report. Thank you.
Item number 4, land at 2 Shyshack Lane, Borghurst. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. So, as indicated, this application is land at 2 Shyshack Lane, and full planning permission is sought for the erection of a detached dwelling with a detached garage in a backland position. There is no update for members on this particular item, and the item is recommended for refusal for 2 reasons, as set out on page 152 of your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. If we could have our first speaker on this, and that's Mr. Moss. Good evening, Mr. Moss. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the console in front of you.
Good evening. I'm Paul Moss. I'm here to speak to you in support of my application for a 4-bedroom house with environmental features the same house that I have lived in for 27 years elsewhere. I have read the application report and it would appear there are 2 main areas of concern: trees and ONR. Trees. The house is positioned in accordance with the tree survey, which also deals with 2 of the neighbours' comments. The trees already are protected by tree preservation orders and they do not belong to me, they belong to a neighbour, so there is no threat to them now or in the future by this application. With regard to any loss of light, the property has a lounge with light from the front and the rear of the property. To the rear, there is also other properties which have similar loss of light over the lane. And there are also more houses next door which are equally affected by these trees and other trees. The ONR. I have shown on the plans in front of you the recent past house developments within the 3 kilometre zone. I understand the old inner zones have been replaced and it's just the 3 kilometre zone now. To highlight how I believe the population in this area is dropping, my family for 80 years lived in the opposite cottage, a total of 4 people at its height, and the property next door the same. And now only 4 people live in total in both properties because they have been reduced in size. So in fairness to my application, I would ask that it would be approved, as I'm sure the evacuation policy would not be affected and can easily accommodate and cope with this development as in other areas within the 3 kilometre zone which have had developments passed. Thank you.
Fair enough, thank you. Questions for Mr. Moss? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Moss. In that case, questions to officers. Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Chair. Officers, I'm just wondering, okay, if the committee was minded to grant planning permission, okay, on this, what would happen to us granting the application as in regards to the ONR?
So if members were minded to approve, it would simply be a decision of the committee. We're not aware that there is any sort of reporting procedure back to the ONR or West Berkshire as the emergency planners.
Do you want to come in?
That's absolutely correct. I think the issue, as you picked up from the report, is that it's, I suppose, it's the weight that needs to be given to the ONR, West Berkshire and Hampshire as the emergency planners' views. So as you'll be aware, the way policy SS7 works is that it basically says that development will be considered on a case-by-case basis depending on its scale, amount, location. And what they have set out is that because of this particular site, even though it's for a single dwelling, being in one of the higher population densities within the DEPZ, that combined with its location within relative proximity to the site boundary of AWE means that it, if you like, it is a stronger objection than it would otherwise be. I think the report sets out a number of appeal decisions for this sort of scale of development. So even though it's a single dwelling, the advice is extremely clear, and that has to be factored in with significant weight. Hence the reasons for refusal.
Thank you, Mike. Any more questions for officers? Okay, it's debate. If there is no debate, I have no particular knowledge or particular strong opinion on this, in which case I'll Councillor Frost.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just trying to marshal my thoughts, okay, for a debate. Okay, I understand Shyshack Lane. I've been up and down it many times for when I lived in the northern part of Tadley for 25, 26 years. I have to say that the one thing that Tadley suffers from, okay, and this area in particular, we always come across about the DPZ, okay, and you know, I don't, in my mind, I want to challenge the DEPZ, okay, because I have to say that I think that we should be making, you know, decisions on, you know, planning applications in our borough. I understand about the emergency planning that West Berkshire does, okay, and also Hampshire County Council does, but we should be the people to actually, you know, decide whether planning applications go forward or not, as the case may be. Okay, so I do have a fundamental issue with the DPZ. However, having said that, okay, I do think, okay, that a 4-bedroom house in this particular site is potentially too big. Okay, I'm not convinced that it's in keeping with the local area. Okay, Shyshack Lane has a number of very small homes and cottages. Okay, up through its length. So in reality, what I would like to see is something that's more in keeping with the housing, okay, that is on Shyshack Lane, in what is actually quite a historic part of North Tadley. So I'm really torn by this one because I want to support officers, okay. I like officers' advice, okay, but I also want to kind of sock it to the DPZ a little bit, you know, and test that, okay. So I don't know which way I'm going to be voting, okay. I'll have to think some more. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, fully respect in debate. Hopefully this will help the committee in terms of Councillor Frost's point, which I think is a point raised a number of times on these applications, and there is that sort of sense of challenge. I think the way I would reflect this back is that the challenge has already happened, in the sense that when the DPZ was first set, the challenge happened to try and get a policy in our local plans under SS7 effectively, which allowed for some development. So it allows it on that criteria-based policy of scale, amount, size, etc. Whereas when the DPZ first came in, it was effectively a blanket, there shall be no development at all. And I think what we're saying is that within this report, even though it's a single dwelling, it is those issues that I've raised already. When you test it against policy SS7, which does allow that limited flexibility on that criteria basis, it fails because of even though it's a single dwelling, its proximity, its location in one of the high or between two densely populated sectors means that it even fails that SS7. So I totally recognise the point Councillor Ross raised, but I suppose that challenge has already taken place through the local plan process, and ultimately it will be a future policy decision as opposed to an individual planning application decision that would test that further.
Thank you, Mike. With no other debate around, I move the officer's recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor Falconer. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? 10. And those against? And I'll take that as an abstention. Councillor Frost. Thank you. That item is refused. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that that item has been refused for 2 reasons as set out within the agenda. Thank you.
Right. We've got number 5, which is 4 Cranesfield, Sherborne St John. Luke.
Thank you. So this is an application as described at 4 Cranesfield in Sherborne St John. The proposal is for the conversion and use of the current attached garage to habitable rooms and a change of use of open land, which is to the east of the dwelling house, to additional residential use. The members had the benefit of a site visit to this site, and the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions listed in the case officer's report. Thank you.
And if we could have Mr. Ballard to the Speaker's chair. Good evening, Mr. Ballard. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and you've already found the button.
Thank you all for your time. So my objection is against the change of use of land rather than the conversion of the internal garage. I actually aim to converse with the council over the precedent statement that I myself submitted, but that's actually incorrectly analysed on page 141 of your document. The planning officer stated that because of mixed decisions, it's not a material consideration. However, the cases they cite are all inappropriate comparators, and thus there is no mixed decision, and it must be given material consideration, as this is a case with physical separation. The precedent relates to a case of Burford versus Secretary of State for communities and local government and the Test Valley Borough Council, it showed that land needs to be attached to the dwelling forming one enclosure. The judge dismissed the appeal, supporting the decision of the planning officer that physical separation meant land did not form part of dwelling. Residential land is used to describe land immediately surrounding a house or dwelling and can include any closely associated buildings or structures forming one enclosure with it, delineating a boundary where the homeowner has a reasonable expectation of privacy. The report states that prior applications have been proved and thus mixed decisions have been made. It appears that they must have just used a search function to get to this point, because when I actually reviewed applications, I got the following quotes by planning officers. For 24 Cranesfield, there is currently no boundary treatment dividing the southern boundary of land with the residential land and curtilage associated with the dwelling house. For numbers 14 to 18 Cranesfield, these have all been used as residential land for the past 10 years and has been incorporated into the garden. These were the reasons for approval for the land and were already within the delineating boundary and incidental to the use of the property. But these applications have no relevance to this property. From the site visit, you're aware that this application has a laurel hedge and a recent installation of gates, showing physical separation. The installation of gates shows a clear intention by the owners to keep it separate, as when the gates are closed, the land cannot be accessed from the residents, therefore being outside of the delineating boundary. Approval of the change of use starts a process of mixed decisions being approved, and therefore starts the mixed decisions argument. The character of the area is very important, and the open plan design for the area is something that is important to ensure it's kept to be the continued benefit of all residents. Local Policy Plan EM1 highlights the need to be sympathetic to the character and visual quality of the area, while EM10 requires development to be in the local distinctiveness and be visually attractive, and previous applications have highlighted the need to retain the character through retention of existing hedges. While the proposal does not include any change to appearance, consideration to ensure preservation of the appearance is important. Conjecture has no place in this meeting, but the opportunity to ensure preservation should not be bypassed. Should the Development Control Committee feel that this piece of land is within the delineated boundary of residents and therefore approve the change of use, it's important that development is restricted on the site via appropriate restrictions to ensure that the area retains its qualities and supports EM1 and EM10 policies for the future.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you for your time.
Questions for the Speaker, Mr. Ballard? Any questions? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Ballard. If we could have Mr. Cotterill, please. Good evening once again, Mr. Cotterill. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, good evening again. This application, as you've just heard, is recommended for approval, and I wasn't going to say too much, unlike me. The main point, obviously, as you've just heard from the objector there, is around the usage of this land. It is owned by number 4 Cranesfield. It is their land. It is, at the moment, obviously open public space, open green space, as it's called, but the officer has obviously gone through all the the policy reasons for keeping that, and it's the officer's recommendation for approval that this won't be changed. It won't cause any harm in their view. The point there about residential curtilage, if you call it that, the red line, it's all one planning unit. It's not individual planning units as it is right now. And that's, we've got the title deeds that actually show that it's one planning unit. So to say that obviously there's gates being put up and it's a clear separation and wanting to keep this as a separate parcel of land, the applicant is entitled to put gates up where he has them into his property, and he just purely simply wants to include this into the official title of residential curtilage. I don't really know what else I can sort of say on this one, to be honest. I think that'll do me. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Cotterill? I've got one. If there's to be no change in how this is going to be used, why bother? Why are you going through this process if nothing's actually going to change on the ground? It seems a slightly odd thing to do. You can give me some sort of explanation.
It's a very good question. Obviously, I'm not the actual applicant, am I? In terms of my client has asked me to look at, doing the change of use, his reasoning behind why he wants to do that. Obviously, I don't know is the actual answer to that. But in truth, if he wants to include that as residential rather than being effectively open public spaces, that's the right word, is it open green space? I can't. In my eyes, I can't see a reason why that would change. But that's what his desires are, and that's what he would like to do. So,
Councillor Frost, followed by Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair, but I was actually trying to indicate to the bench that Councillor Court had a question.
Okay, in that case, Councillor Court.
Thank you very much. Can you clarify who owns this piece of open ground?
yes, the applicants that own number 4 is part of their planning unit, it's part of their dwelling.
They actually have the deed of ownership to that ground?
Yes, I have a copy of it on my phone now.
Any more questions?
Thank you. Just a quick one to confirm. So is the reason that the hedge is there is it's protected? They can't get rid of that hedge, am I right?
That is my understanding, yes, that hedge is part of the protection. It was part of there was an application that I did that was before you all a few months back for the erection of the garage, and there was discussion over the hedge, and we had to put protection in place to make sure that we didn't damage the hedge or do anything to it. So.
I know you can't answer the question, but I will ask it anyway. There was a previous application. It did concern the garage, as you rightly say. Why in the world didn't the applicant then seek to take that land back in? Why now? I know you can answer it, but I'm going to put that on the record that there was another application. It could have been done then. It's clearly being done now, and we have no reason in front of us from the applicant to judge it on.
Was there an actual question, I suppose? But yeah, well, yeah, but me being me, I'll try and answer it. Yeah, at the time, he didn't want to include that land. It was just purely and simply for the erection of the garage that you can see there now. That was what he wanted to do. For the record as well then. There were some objections and things that some of the residents put forward to look at that this might be used in connection with his business. Now, I think I said at the time, and some of you may remember, he sells cars. He's got in excess of 120 cars that he tries to sell. He's not going to do it from that little piece of grass that's there, is he? So, just for the record, it's nothing to do with the business, all right?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cottrell. No more questions? Thank you, Mr. Cottrell. And if we could have Councillor McIntyre, please. Good evening, Councillor McIntyre. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and councillors. It feels a bit weird to be sat on this side of the chamber, but I shall begin. This application was brought in due to the number of objections from residents, and residents have asked me to come and represent them and present some of those objections as well. If you turn to page 176, 177 of the agenda, you will see objections from the Parish Council and the very detailed objections, not just some objections, that residents have put in. Fort Cranesfield has a history within the village and is known both to myself and my predecessor. There have been 3 separate applications for planning consent since 2020, gathering over 50 distinct objections from neighbours and objections from the Parish Council on each application. Now, from my understanding of the situation, these are not neighbourly disputes, these aren't tit for tats. I believe residents still have amicable interactions with one another, and I believe this is simply down to residents wanting to keep the look and feel of their perfectly little pleasant corner of Sherburn St John. I present no objection to the request to convert the existing attached double garage into additional habitable space. I believe this is entirely within keeping of our planning policies and respect the rights of all residents to make modifications to their property where they so desire, if they do not impact on neighbours' protected rights. Instead, I have been asked the residents to come before you today to object to the change of use of the neighbouring parcel of land into additional residential land. If I touch on one of the previous applications, 20/02731/HSE, this involved this very parcel of land that is the subject of today's application. This application was withdrawn at the request of the case officer given the concerns over the loss of the green infrastructure area contrary to policy EM5 of the local plan. This is public record in the committee report for the further application 21-00350-HSE. Whilst all planning cases should be judged on the merits of the application in front of them, it is worth noting that this previous application from 2020 was for the removal of the protected hedgerow, laying of hardstanding and the construction of a two-storey garage. Mr Chair, I repeat your question because I am left with asking myself, what is the benefit behind this application for change of use, if not to bring forward further applications for development? The officer's report laid before committee claims this pocket of land is regarded as a surplus, inconsequential area. Unfortunately, I must disagree with that statement. This pocket of land is not inconsequential to neighbours, but it adds to the landscaping of their part of this estate. I requested a site visit for councillors to impress upon themselves just how this parcel of land complements the surrounding area. In fact, officers actually go on to contradict themselves further by then making reference to the importance of the open appearance to the character of the area. This is my first time coming before you, councillors, but to prepare, I did play back the committee hearing on the 10th of August and watched with interest the application concerning the Whitchurch Tennis Club, where I observed the chairman placing himself in the position of the impacted residents. I ask councillors to do the same in this case. If you had enjoyed the benefit of this parcel of land for nearly 30 years, would you be in favour of this loss of amenity? To conclude, if committee are minded to grant change of use, then I would respectfully ask that conditions are imposed that would continue to protect the historic hedgerow that forms a natural boundary and to impose further strong conditions that prevent any further development on this green space. Thank you for your time, councillors.
Questions for Councillor McIntyre? Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. If this bit of land actually belongs to the people that own number 4 Cranesfield or whatever the address is, what right does any of the neighbours have claim on that land? It's not their land. It clearly belongs to number 4. How can any of the neighbours have any say on something that is essentially not their land? They've had use of it for several years, granted, but it actually belongs to number 4. So what right do the neighbours think they have to object when that land doesn't belong to them? It actually belongs to the person that lives at number 4.
That's a perfectly valid question, Councillor Freeman. As part of the planning permission for the original layout of the estate, the green area that was there was specifically mentioned as being keeping open green space for the benefit of the residential look and feel. That hedgerow was put in place, and there is planning conditions against it that is the boundary, that hedge cannot be put down. So I absolutely agree with you. It is the residents' land. However, there are conditions on what it can be used for, and it was developed in keeping with the landscape of the original application for building out the Cranesfield.
Councillor Howard-Sorrell, has your question been answered? Thank you. Any more questions? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Falconer.
Where do we stand? This application seems to have two distinct parts. One is for the garage and the other is the curtilage. How do we stand on rejecting one and accepting another? That's basically it.
So as I believe each application should be considered as a whole, as one piece. So if you were to have concerns with one part, you are entitled to, it would be a refusal of the whole application, but your refusal obviously would relate to the specific area. And the applicant would then obviously have the opportunity to split their applications up and come in for an application just for the garage to cover that off. But we have to consider the application as one.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't have any issues regarding the conversion of the garage. Okay, no issues with that whatsoever. But regarding this parcel of land, okay, if we were to grant change of use, okay, to residential, okay, how strong a condition can we put on this so that we can prevent any permitted development rights or any building on this particular piece of land?
Thank you for your question. So the officer's recommendation does include the withdrawal of permitted development rights for the site. So this includes Class E, which relates to incidental outbuildings. It also includes Class F, which relates to hard surfacing. And we've also added in Class A of Part 2 of the schedule, which removes the right to install gates, walls and fences. So in some ways, I would say that those three removals do limit the use quite significantly.
Sorry, Chair, just a follow-up question. Okay, so if sorry, you said that with the condition is outbuildings. What about if it was a temporary outbuilding, such as a shed? Okay, would that be permitted, or is there something we could do to ensure, okay, that it remained green land?
So I would suggest that a shed is a permanent structure and would need planning permission in itself. There is case law that goes back defining what a building is, and sheds often do fall within that remit. And if a temporary building was put up, it would be temporary, so it would be removed, I would suggest, with time anyway. But anything permanent, which is to do with how it's connected to the ground, length of time it's been on the site, so there is definition of what temporary and permanent are. I feel fairly comfortable that, you know, a shed wouldn't fall within that definition and would need planning permission.
Councillor Harvey, followed by Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. I get the distinctive feeling that someone's trying to be very clever here. You're saying, quite understandably so, that the removal of permitted development rights is part of the defence in terms of that, and I get that. Currently, any application that came on that land would have to be considered the fact the land is open space. However, if we change it to residential use, you take away the permitted rights, an application can still come forward, but it would have to be considered against the fact that it is within the residential property against residential policies because it's now residential land. Am I right in that assumption?
Well, I'm happy to answer. In my opinion, obviously, the use of the land is one part, but in terms of considering acceptability of a scheme or a development, the wider the character of the area plays a role. So the actual use, physical use, or the land use is not significant. For example, the garage building, obviously in the previous applications, were withdrawn because the built form was harmful, and that will remain whether it's residential use or regarded as open amenity space. So that the value of the use of the land and adds to the character of the land remains. So, yes.
So just getting it in my head correctly so I understand my argument on this. The fact that it's amenity now, we can give weight to and consider because it's amenity. That's part of the assessment of character and assessment of the area. In the future, of course, it won't be open space. Were we to approve this, it would be residential land. Therefore, we can't take that into account in the future.
In terms of open space, it's an open space, and that's what we would seek to retain. In terms of, like I say, I think the land use is not as overly relevant to the consideration of terms of anything coming forward. It is purely a character based, and that will remain, and that is part of our policy EM10, EM1, which requires a consideration of character. So the land use isn't relevant. So I don't think whether it's residential or classed as open amenity space at the moment is highly relevant. Hope that helps.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I'll admit I am totally perplexed and confused by this. So, do we have indicative proof that this land belongs to this householder? I think the answer is yes. Do we have proof that it is an open space for the use of the public and not him? Is one question. If we don't have it, why have we this debate? Because it's his land and he can do what he likes, and covenants, as we know, mean nothing. So I just want clarity that this is a piece of land that just happens to not, well, he has a hedge in the middle of it, and it's his land anyway, and it's not a green space. So we've got no powers to even declare it a green space and you can't change it, and he's applying for something that's unnecessary. Can I have that clarified, please? Thank you.
Firstly, I can clarify, we have had submission of land registry documents that highlight this land within their ownership, so I'm fairly comfortable confirming, yes, it is their land, they do own it. And in terms of your second question, which related, I believe, to whether it was open space or how it was perceived, it's not, in our view, defined as public open space in terms of, as you would expect, parks and recreational space to be considered. It is open space in the sense that it is open, and it was obviously at some point designed as a space to be enjoyed, but it wasn't for the public benefit. It is in the land ownership of the owner to use as they see fit from that point of view. Is there anything else?
So to clarify that we have no documentational proof that this site was in the development brief of this estate to be anything other than curtilage of that property.
Councillor, I totally understand why it's slightly perplexing using your words application, because I think it is slightly odd. I think the key thing is that it's within the land ownership of the applicant. It was designated as effectively amenity space, so as Luke's described, it's not a public open space in the sense of a kickabout area or anything like that. It's a amenity space. So it's I suppose it's its visual contribution of not being built upon and being green that it was its effective use. And policy EM1 has in it about private amenity spaces as well. The fact that the change of use to a degree doesn't really have that much impact if you were to approve with those conditions on, because as has been described, there'd be removal of permitted development rights for outbuildings, for gates and fences or hardstanding. So although, yes, technically there would be a change of use because the application would approve it, the actual outcome doesn't make any difference. If they then come back with another application, that has to be judged on its basis at the time. Does that help?
Well, yes, it helps, but it's still, so I'm just drilling down that somewhere when this was built, that amenity space was defined against this property.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in other developments, you'll see strips of landscaping, for example, down the side of a property which aren't actually within what you would immediately view as the garden of the property. It's similar to that. It's just that this is a very, I have to say, quite a unique position, I think, in terms of how it's been located or designed in. So there's no doubt that it isn't part of the original residential land of the property, hence why there's a need for an application. So it does need a change of use, but I think our analysis with the conditions is that actually there isn't any harm resulting from the proposed development in this application.
Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to be awkward and complain about the conversion of the garage, but I won't. Instead, there's a public comment on here that says part of the highlighted area is part of a shared driveway. Is that accurate? Is the part of the shared driveway not actually part of the land that is owned by the owner of number 4?
I noted the comment part of that, but I don't think we have a document to highlight exactly where the shared ownership is, or if that is the case, but we certainly is the applicant's land, and a change of use doesn't necessarily change the right of access. Potentially that is a civil matter, that's not a planning matter anyway. So we couldn't obviously cut off an area that would be used as a shared access if there's an agreement in place already. I think that falls outside our remit.
Thank you. The other question is, one of the conditions is removing the ability to build fences or walls. There's been quite a lot of argument or debate about whether the other residents should have access to this land when they don't own it. So I'm almost uncomfortable removing the owner's permission to erect a small fence, for example, to stop people using it as a parking space, using it for their kids to play on when it's not their land. So I would almost be minded to, we haven't got there yet, but move it for approval without that condition. Is there any specific reason you can point to why that condition is there in terms of protection of the bush or anything? Because that's the only issue that I really care about. But in terms of preventing the other residents from using that space when it's not their land, and they sound like they feel entitled to use it, I don't think we should be preventing him from necessarily putting up a 1 metre high small picket fence.
The reason for the condition really relates to the visual impact the fence would have in terms of the change from an open space to an enclosed space, and obviously that would be a visual change to the character. So that condition prevents that and sort of retains the status quo, even though the land use would change, the character of the land would remain, and that's the reason, visual rather than controlling entry.
Councillor Court, followed by Councillor Morrow.
Thank you, Roger. Just like your observations on it's page 177. It comes under public observations and it talks about various clauses within the HM land registry map. And I'd just like your views on how we should take those into account, or if they're relevant, or what.
Thank you for your question. So this relates to the land registry and the meaningful way gates and nor hedges, that in terms of heights of fences. So I think that falls very much into more of a civil matter than a planning matter, rather than, so it's not something we would consider, that's more of a legal matter.
Point which talks about is not permitted to carry on any trade business or on any part of the property.
So once again, that would be a material change of use, potentially any of the land, because this application is changed to residential use, so another use would be a material change which would likely need planning permission.
Suggesting the recommendations for going forward on this are we take into account similar conditions which encompass that.
I'm suggesting that in terms of commercial use, there's no requirement for a condition because it needs a planning application, so therefore it is controlled. We have control over the use of the land from that perspective anyway, so it'd be unreasonable to condition or add a condition limiting the commercial use.
I'm just minded with the garage itself is retrospective planning approval.
Yeah, I note your concerns, but I think we have to consider the application on its merit and take it at face value, and that's what we're looking to do. So.
Thank you.
Councillor Morrow.
Changing this to residential land, does that allow them to treat the land differently? I mean, it doesn't have to remain green.
So in terms of remaining green, I think those conditions of removal of permitted development rights should limit the change of use of the land. I mean, they would be entitled as they are now to plant trees. That's not development. But in terms of actual physical built form, I think there is limited to nothing I could suggest that they could do to the land without a planning application.
Councillor Tomlin, second question.
Sorry, Chair, it's been answered. Thanks.
Any more questions for officers? In that case, debate. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. This is a good one, isn't it? I'd be tempted to move deferral because what I want to know hasn't necessarily been answered yet, because the arguments are perfectly logical around the room. I don't disagree with any of you. But what I don't know is why this is designated as amenity separate to the residential land of the property, because clearly it is. It isn't the residential amenity of the property, it is different to that. And I would want to know why it was that amenity in the first place before I felt comfortable doing away with it. So in a sense, a deferral on that basis of getting to the bottom of that particular point about amenity and whose amenity and the context of that, I think is important if we are genuinely going to look at changing the use of it. So that would be my reason for deferral, just to understand that point, and then I would feel more comfortable with the application in front of us.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. Should that motion be made, I will be minded to second it.
Thank you. Councillor Howard Sorrell.
My only concern with that would be the conversion of the garage would then be delayed potentially quite significantly. Can we, again, defer part of it, or no? Can we condition something in so that the land doesn't change residential use until, no? Okay.
Councillor Howard Sorrell, you didn't have the benefit of the viewing panel. The conversion work on the garage has already been done. This is effectively a part retrospective applications. So I think that's, your concern is, yeah, Councillor Harvey.
Can I just clarify? I have absolutely no issue with the garage. I get that. The applicant has chosen to make this part of their application. Therefore, that's their choice. I'm sorry, but that's the reason for my deferral is because I've got a problem with that and I want to know more before I make that decision. So, you know, they've made that decision. I have no issue with the garage. It's the other bit that I've got a problem with.
We need to make a decision. So would somebody please like to make... You did move it, and Councillor Frost has seconded it. So it has been moved and seconded for review, for deferral. Those in favour of deferral? Yeah, I think we've got a full set there. Thank you. That item is deferred.
I can confirm the item has been deferred to consider the merits proposed by the councillor.
Could we, within that, clarify the red line area as well? Because it does appear to include part of the hard-standing turnaround area.
So, Chair, that's just to clarify for the record, that's deferral on the grounds of wanting to know more about the original planning history of the site and why that land was designed in that way and what uses were envisaged for it, and clarification of the red line in relation to the shared access.
Yeah. Thank you. Item 6, Heathcote Cottage, the Common, Silchester.
Thank you, Chairman. As indicated, this application is for the property within the garden of Heathcote Cottage at Silchester. Full planning permission is requested for the erection of an outbuilding and a store. The outbuilding is to sit to the southern end of the curtilage and the store is to replace a smaller building already within the garden. If I bring members' attention to the update paper, and there is just a very slight amendment to the recommendation with regards to conditions 3 and 4 to remove reference to the Bramley neighbourhood plan area because this site isn't in the neighbourhood plan area. The application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions and informatives listed within your agenda. Thank you.
We have no speakers, so questions to officers. No questions to officers. In that case, debate. In that case, I will move the officer's recommendation from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Frost. Moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? 100%, everybody. Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. This application has been approved subject to the conditions and informatives within your report. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 7, Recreation Ground Skate Park, Tadley, Common Road, Tadley. Luke.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an application at the Recreation Ground Tadley. The proposal is for the refurbishment of the existing skate park, including the removal of old ramps and construction of a new concrete skate park with a landscape bund around the perimeter. The application is recommended for approval subject to the listed conditions at the end of the case officer's report. Thank you.
And if we could have Councillor Slimming to the Speaker's chair. Good evening, Councillor. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the console in front of you.
Wrong one. Thank you. Good evening, councillors. I'm not here today as the Borough Councillor. I'm here as the Tadley Town Councillor. I'm Chair of the Rec and Leisure Committee, and it is the Town Council's application that's before you. Thank you for the officers for recommending approval. And I've come here this evening just to perhaps reassure you as why there may have been so many objections to it. And you will see there is a trend in those objections. The skateboard park itself is the third one that will be in place in this particular location. The original one was put there in early 2000s, and in 2009 there was a further upgrade in remembrance of two young people who were killed in a car accident called Jake and Lee. They wanted better upgraded facilities, and to enable it to happen, they actually raised money locally, including money that came from ITV Meridian on a vote, to actually put that there. So this particular skateboard park that is there now was paid for by basically public subscription. It wasn't paid for by the Town Council, although the Town Council has maintained it over the period since. Last November, we were advised by the Health and Safety inspection that was carried out by Basingstoke and Dean Council that in fact the skateboard park was no longer repairable. It is a steel structure and needs to be welded. There was no longer any ability to weld the current situation. And therefore, we were faced with the position of it being basically banned and had to be closed, and therefore with no skateboard facility in the town. It is a much loved facility. It is quite a large one, and it does actually attract older and more experienced riders of BMXs and skateboards. We appreciate that. However, being the Town Council, we had to look at providing something that was going to be paid for from the Town Council, and therefore from public money, which had to actually meet the needs of all the population of our area. So we went out to Canvas, who I think produced the one in the War Memorial Park here, who suggested this particular layout, which would actually be more useful and accessible to more people, young and old, and for different people using different types of rollerblades, scooters, and obviously BMX and skateboards. The family of Jake and Lee are still in the area, and we made every attempt to consult with them and with residents. I have the Town Council newsletter that went out, and you can see it's quite a distinctive newsletter, and it mentions, this went out in February, it mentions the skateboard park and asks for people to engage with us. You have 1 minute remaining. Thank you. We have very little engagement, unfortunately. So we actually, as a council, decided that we would go with the application because obviously it's now urgent. The skateboard park is still open, but at any time we could be told to close it. I would hope that the people in Tadley will benefit from this. We've had other requests for a bigger site that would actually look after more people, and that might be something in the future. But this would provide a facility which is much loved and much used by our residents, and I hope that you'll be able to support that. Thank you.
Questions for the Speaker? Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for coming, Councillor Slimming. It's always good to see you here. Okay, I would just like to help you, have you help me understand why comments like the proposed park is not suitable for the BMX users.
Yes, I can help you, Councillor Frost. The current park is quite high. If any of you have ever seen pictures of it, it's basically got very tall ends and a ramp in the middle. And it is quite high. It's higher than I am. But also, it has to have a fence around it because obviously we're concerned that people might come off and hit people. And it hasn't got anything to stop people, apart from a rail at the top, actually coming off. So it is really aimed at the more experienced and older people. And that is why I think some of them are currently saying this is not suitable because it's not going to be like for like. And we understand that it isn't like for like. It will be more accessible for all age groups.
Any more questions? No? Thank you very much. And if we could have Councillor Carruthers, please. Good evening, Councillor Carruthers. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. The skate park is, and since its initial construction in the late 90s, has always been a popular meeting place for young people in Tadley. It's in close proximity to a fantastic play park with a range of equipment. It's situated in a field that is well used by people walking dogs, exercising or participating in sports and recreation, next to a zip wire, also a popular facility, and very close to another field that contains a range of exercise equipment. Just across the way there is a multi-use games area. All of these brilliant facilities complementing one another. Tadley Town Council have created a fantastic space for people of all ages and abilities to utilise. The skate park forms an important part of this space. I recall when it was first built, the excitement amongst local young people that they would have somewhere purpose-built to skate and ride. At the time, my brother used to spend his days building ramps in ours and his friends' gardens, which was not popular with the adults. The skate park was popular from the beginning. It was renovated in 2010, around 10 or 11 years into its life. We've reached that time again when the skate park needs to be updated. Time has moved on, and today we are looking at the plans for a modernised skate park for the 2020s. I know there has been some concern expressed in comments made on the application that this new skate park is more aimed at younger children than previous designs. The design statement makes it clear that the new design is suitable for all ages, and this also includes wheelchair users. There are areas of the design that offer different levels of challenge depending on the ability and confidence of the user. The open plan design will mean that users are visible from all angles of the immediate surroundings, both acting as a deterrent to antisocial behaviour, allowing supervising adults to be in the vicinity but still see whilst using other nearby facilities, and it's also a great way of helping to keep everybody safe. I see the facility as a positive addition which will open itself up to a wider group of users. I'm going to read you some comments that have been shared on a local Tadley social media page in the last year, with permission. My 8-year-old daughter is skateboarding and scootering mad. Recently we've been regulars at the skate park. Just want to say what a great bunch of youngsters go there. She even got a compliment today from one of the lads which she loved. If you have teenagers there at 4ish today, please thank them. Hey mums, my son has just been up the skate park and there was a really lovely teenage girl who was helping all the younger ones do tricks. I just want to say a big thank you to her and what a lovely girl she was to him.
You have 1 minute remaining.
I think that the updated version of the skate park offers an inclusive, modern, versatile and accessible space for young people of Tadley and the surrounding areas to continue to enjoy for a time to come. I thank Tadley Town Council for all of their hard work to get it to this point, and I very much hope that the committee will offer their support tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Carruthers? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? No? I haven't got any questions. Debate? Councillor Harvey? Sorry.
Get the sequence right. I get there. Yeah, just agree with what's been said so far by the two public speakers, our two councillors, and I would move the recommendation as on the order paper. I think it's absolutely fine and good.
I'm happy to second it. So, anybody wish to speak on it? Councillor Freeman.
Just quickly, so I have nothing against these plans, but from my own work with youth, I do find that the older teens have a very distinct lack of facilities in this borough. And so for something that was actually purposely geared towards the older teens is now being moved to the younger ones. It can be in a good way, but sometimes we risk alienating these young people, and so they're not going to use it at all because they feel like there's a lot of babies there, they don't want to be around. So I think we do need to be careful about trying to make something that's a facility for all types of people. Sometimes you have to realise that the older kids, they don't want to be around kids, smaller children. That it's too much like those pesky brothers and sisters that they've got. They want some time away where they can be teenagers and not have to worry about small children. So I do think we need to be careful as a borough. We need to seriously look at provision for older, specifically older teenagers, when they're not incorporated in a family group with younger children.
Councillor Frost, and then we go to the vote.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would just like to say that while I agree with Councillor Freeman, she's made some very good points there. I also think that just to support Tadley Town Council, because it is the spend of public money, okay, they need to ensure that access to the skate park is as wide as possible. I understand your points, you know, very well made, and I do hope, okay, that the older youths, okay, young children, young adults as we call them, okay, will continue to use, okay, the skate park, okay, and help the youngsters, okay, with their tricks. So I'm fully in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? That is. Thank you. That's everybody. Thank you. Luke.
Yeah, thank you. So the application is moved for approval subject to the conditions listed at the end of the report. Thank you.
It's 9:20. We are probably not going to get through the rest of this agenda by 9:30, but I don't think it will be long after that. So is everybody happy to continue and finish the agenda? Yeah? Thank you. Right. Item number 6, White Bungalow, Ash Lane, Silchester. Luke.
Thank you. So this is an application at White Bungalow, Ash Lane, Silchester. The proposal is to remove the Section 106 agreement relating to affordable housing attached to the planning permission previously granted. That permission was for the redevelopment of the site for replacement attached property, in addition to 2 3-bedroom dwellings with associated carports. The application is recommended for approval and the removal of the Section 106 agreement.
Thank you, Luke. If we could have our speakers, which is Miss Downey and Mr. Macklin. You have 4 minutes between you. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining, and the microphone button is on the console in front of you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, members, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this evening. Before you is an agreement to remove a Section 106 agreement on the site in question at the White Bungalow in Ash Lane, Silchester. The applicant, in the course of the process of being granted planning permission, instructed their own viability assessment from Kempton Carcroft, which found the proposed development was unviable to make affordable housing contributions. This was then further supported by the Council's own viability assessment, which was conducted by Adams Integra, who also found the development unviable to make affordable housing contributions. Therefore, the report you have in front of you is to remove the Section 106 agreement from the planning permission in order for the development to proceed. The development will contribute 3 units to the Council's housing quota and is supported by the officers. We hopefully can answer any questions that you may have. Many thanks.
Questions for the speakers? Councillor Howard Sorrell.
Could you just explain what unviable means in this context? Is it you're not going to make enough profit, or is it you'll actually make a loss? Because if it's not enough profit, I have very little sympathy. If it's you'll actually make a loss, we can have a conversation.
Both viability studies show a loss.
Any more questions? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up where Councillor Howard Sorrell left off. It's my understanding from a conversation I had with officers, but I just want to put it on the record, we aren't talking about marginal viability here. We are talking about a significant viability spread, because normally I go to the wall as others would do for affordable housing. But as I understand it, there is actually a significant viability issue here.
Yes, thank you. So obviously there were 2 reports carried out. There were slightly different values, but both of them were significant losses at minus 43,000, I think ours came back. And we would expect that any development coming forward would seek to achieve at least a 15 to 20% profit on top of that. So obviously that's a minus 43 plus, and then obviously the profit on top. So yes, there was significant losses.
Thank you. Any more questions? In that case, debate. In that case, I will move the officer recommendation from the chair, seconded by Councillor Tomlin. Take me pick. Brain dead. It's getting late. Moved and seconded for approval as per the officer recommendation. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I make that 10. And those against? 1. Thank you. That has been approved. Luke.
Thank you. Yes, so the application has been moved for approval subject to the officer's recommendation.
Agenda item 7 and 9, Warburton Road, Chinham. And Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman. As members will note from your agenda, this application is slightly different. It is a request to consider the expediency for enforcement action where development has occurred in the form of a change of use of land to the rear of the properties of 7 to 9 Warburton Road. And that has occurred without the benefit of planning permission, and no planning application has been forthcoming. So essentially, the proposal is akin to a retrospective planning application, and the report before you provides an assessment of the proposal in planning terms having regard to the development plan. The recommendation is that it is not expedient to take enforcement action. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And if we could have Councillor Miller. Good evening, Councillor Miller. You have 4 minutes. I'll warn you when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chairman. And good evening, committee. I've been a ward councillor in Chinham for 15 years. And I've been on the Chinham Parish Council for 15 and have sat on the Parish Planning Committee for that time. And I'm the current chairman of that committee and of the Parish Council. I speak this evening as the ward councillor, by the way, to have that on record. The 3 Chinham ward councillors called this recommendation into DC for your consideration. The case centres on whether it is acceptable for homeowners to move their fences and enclose open green space available for all to enjoy for their own exclusive use without following proper planning processes, which would necessarily include local engagement and consultation. As stated in the report at para 1.4, that a breach of planning has been identified, so that has been established and exists. The only point up for debate and decision is as stated in the recommendation on page 226 of the report at para 2. The expediency for enforcement action is laid out in paras 4.8 onwards, and the point of 4.9 states that enforcement action is discretionary. That again is accepted. However, the debate is about the validity and acceptance, or not, of the case put before you this evening within the report. In para 4.10, the last sentence appears to state that if an appeal were submitted, it would be on the grounds that planning permission ought to be granted. It begs the question, why was planning permission not applied for in the first place? Para 4.21 admits that some loss of green space is lost with the fencing encroachment, and also the fence, as erected, is stark. I quote the report. There is no disagreement with the fencing per se, as it could be erected under permitted development. However, it is the encroachment that has created the breach. The paragraph argues that perhaps the degradation of the grass verge, that which is remaining, is considered sufficient to offset any harm. We contest that. In paras 4.22 and 0.23, it is argued that has not been demonstrable harm caused to the local character of the area to be contrary to policy. However, we disagree. The 40-year-old Chenham community is well established, and the sudden appearance of this fencing did and does alter the character of the locality and goes against policy EM10 2A. The conclusion assumes that had planning permission been applied for, planning permission would have been recommended having regard to the policies in the development plan. This may be true, but arguing on policy basis alone without wider consultation, considering the context of Chenham, is, I suggest, misleading. Chenham is in its own way unique in Basingstoke in the way the development is laid out, with most residential properties backing onto amenity green open space. And over the years, there's been many instances of boundaries creeping outwards, fences moved with and without permission. When planning permission has been applied for, the planning process kicks in, with formal consultation, scrutiny, and all aspects considered in neighbourhood, parish and local planning authority level before applications are determined. In this instance, this has not been carried out, and the only recourse was to initiate enforcement action. And we're here tonight addressing reasons not to continue that process. To agree the recommendations tonight sends the message, why bother applying for planning permission when we will get approval without it? I'm sure that would apply across the borough. We request the committee does not approve the recommendation before you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Questions for Councillor Miller? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Freeman.
How much sort of additional land did they take when they moved their fence backwards without asking?
I would refer you to the officer report. So in paragraphs 4.5, 4.6 sets out where all those measurements have occurred. So we have gone from a rear amenity space beyond the original boundaries of sort of 6.6 metres to sort of 3 metres between the two properties to approximately 1.5 to 1.3 metres.
Councillor Falconer.
Thank you, Chair. It seems the two properties have moved the fencing. Do we know if they have gone beyond services or underground facilities where the utilities, water, etc., may need access and it's now blocked off?
I'm afraid we don't have that knowledge, no.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to know that if we were to refuse this, okay, what would be the course of action for the council then?
So, should the expediency motion fall, sorry, the recommendation fall, then it would be the serving of an enforcement notice.
Sorry, my second question. So would that mean if we serve enforcement notice, we'd be requesting or demanding that they take the fence back to the original start line, for want of a better word, fence line?
If that was the resolution of members, then yes, we would be. But again, it would depend on what your decision is this evening.
And just to add to that, the rationale or reasoning behind serving an enforcement notice, you have to go through the same assessment as you would do with considering a planning application, so you'd need to provide reasons, so akin to reasons for refusal, if you think about it in those terms. The other aspect of it is that the whole issue around enforcement is, and this is the why, as described in the report, if an enforcement notice is served, yes, it requires that to happen, so the steps you'd have to set out, which presumably would be removal of the fence and reinstatement of the land as it previously was, that is subject to an appeal in the same way as a planning application. So effectively what would be available to those persons which the enforcement notice is served upon is an appeal whereby they could appeal either the the issues that have been raised in terms of the reasons, and they effectively apply for planning permission through that process, through that appeal. So that's a ground A. They can appeal the measures required. They can appeal the timescales and things like that. So it's just a flag that it's the same assessment to a degree as if it was a planning application in terms of finding that there's actually demonstrable harm from the development against the development plan policies.
Councillor Frost, followed by Councillor Court.
It is one final question, and then I will be quiet for the evening, I promise you. Okay. So if we were not to take enforcement action, okay, due to expediency, okay, the land that they have enclosed, okay, will they be made to purchase that land, or would we give it them?
So effectively, it'd be a separate matter. It's the same as any other land ownership issue. If someone does something that is on someone else's land, they require to resolve that in that scenario. I think from a planning process point of view, what we would do in closing in a not expediency case, effectively, i.e., we've identified a breach, that's clearly set out in the report. No doubt about that. What we will do, we would close the case, saying that it's not expedient to pursue, but make clear that it doesn't actually benefit from planning permission as a result. So the applicant or the owner still has the option to submit an application to regularise that. So it doesn't actually give planning permission by not pursuing it, but that would be the way in which it would be closed.
Councillor Court.
Thank you, Chair. Where does the council stand if these are not the original landowners who extended the ground?
So an enforcement notice would be served on the owners, the current owners of the land. So effectively it would be served on anyone who has an interest in that land.
Supplementary, if I might. So if these are not the landowners who actually extended the ground, but they bought the property with this extended property, the council would still take action, and then it would be up to the existing landowners to take action against the people they bought from.
That's correct.
Any more questions for officers? In that case, debate. Councillor Tomlin.
I 100% agree with Councillor Miller. Obviously, I have a history in Chinham going back as Councillor Miller does. And this has only too often happened. Actually, in my ward currently in Bramley, we have a similar situation where we are taking a repossession of the land taken order, which was done in a similar way. So in terms of consistency in the message we send, I think we should just refuse this application, as it's been expressed, refusal, on the grounds of loss of public amenity, the public green amenity space, words, and on that basis we move forward. Thank you. And I will propose that we refuse the application.
Thank you. Been moved for refusal.
Chair,
Yeah, I'll bring Mike in.
Sorry, Chair, it's just on the actual way in which it's phrased. I think just trying to find the recommendation briefly, I don't think it's a refusal of the application as such. I think it's not accepting the recommendation and therefore proposing as a committee that an enforcement notice be taken forward. And if I may, Councillor Tomlin, assist with that. As I understand it, your reason is that it's the impact on public amenity space through the loss of that land. So it'd be a policy EM1 and related policy EM10 and possibly EM5 in relation to the green infrastructure. And then the steps that would normally be taken would be obviously removal of the fence, reinstatement of the land, and we would normally apply a 3-month time period on the enforcement notice. So whether that would assist in the motion.
Very much so. So thank you for that. Yes, it's slightly different to our norm, shall we say. So yeah, I totally accept that. Thank you.
Councillor Freeman.
I would say I'm quite happy to second the motion. I totally agree. I think we set a precedent here. If we let these people do this? What's to stop them moving them another couple of feet back and then taking up the whole path? What's to stop some other resident doing exactly the same thing? I think it sends the wrong message if we let them get away with this. I think they need to be, you know, fair enough if they take it away, apply for planning permission and it gets granted, that's different. But you can't let people just go doing this. It needs something, you know, we need to say something, otherwise it sends the wrong message.
Thank you. Anyone else for debate? Councillor Godison.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, we all have sympathy with the proposal that's being put forward, but I'm just slightly concerned to read in 4.28 that if it was concluded, if a planning application had been received to regulise the change of use, planning permission would have been recommended. So if we vote against taking it any further, presumably they will appeal, and that statement will allow the inspector to find in their favour. So I think one needs to take that, be aware of that before one decides how to vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, please come in.
Sorry, could I just refer the committee also to paragraph 4.3 in which it reports that property services team in the council has already taken some legal action in relation to this matter, and resolved it as far as they're concerned with the owners of the property. So although planning and property land ownership are obviously very separate, there is some context to that. So I expect any enforcement action may be more complicated than it seems at this moment, because they'll probably argue that, well, there will be arguments in their favour probably.
You say the land ownership team have resolved it. How have they resolved it? Have they sold the land to these applicants, or is the land still in council ownership?
My only understanding is that they agreed where the fence would be moved back to, but I don't know the full details, so it might be you want to bring it back with a further, report on the whole context, but there's obviously been some action taken by the property services team in relation to this matter already.
Thank you for that. My concern with this is we've been here before. In Bramley, on the smithy, people moved their fence. We took enforcement action. They went to appeal and we lost. And I agree entirely with everything Councillor Miller said. This should not happen. It is totally wrong. But we lost that case. We lost it because there was no planning reason why that land shouldn't become garden curtilage. 101 other reasons, but we're not interested in 101 other reasons. We're interested in planning reasons. And if you look at 4.10, they said, they will have the opportunity to appeal on the grounds that planning permission ought to be granted. Now, I'm fairly convinced that if this planning application came to this committee, we would actually refuse it. But I'm also convinced if it went to appeal, we would lose, because the landscape impact is minimal, the strategic views impact is zero, and the biodiversity impact is also zero. In fact, there'd probably be more biodiversity if it was enclosed in a garden than there is as having it as a grass verge. So we are going to go to the vote, but please, much as I hate saying this, that is what has happened before. We have lost, we lose costs. We need to be realistic about whether this should be judged under planning law or whether it should be treated as a boundary dispute. So it's been moved and seconded for enforcement action. Those in favour of enforcement action? I'll make that 2. 3. Those against enforcement action? One, two, three, 4, 5, 6. I make that 7. 7. Any abstentions? 1. Councillor Howard Sorrell, thank you. Do we need another motion on this?
Councillor Frost has got his... Oh, sorry, Councillor Frost.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move a motion that we actually defer, okay, this decision while we actually get the details of the potential action that the property team have done, because if the fence has been agreed in its current position, then fine. Okay, that would possibly sway the committee one way, but if the fence line has been moved to another position, okay, it could then move us in another way. So I think I'd like to defer it for more information on that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Frost, and again, just hopefully assist the committee. I think any consideration of deferral would, again, have to be seen, I suppose, echoing what the Chair said in the first instance about what are the planning merits of this assessment. So the land ownership is a separate matter, in the same way as any other land ownership. It just so happens that it's our land ownership that was involved, when I say our, the councils as opposed to the LPA. So it would, I think it would need, the committee would need to be clear in their minds that there isn't, that there is an issue there in terms of the demonstrable harm, in terms of what's happened in terms of the development on the site already, not the land ownership issue in the first instance. And if part of that is really dependent on understanding the land ownership, then that would be a reasons for a deferral. But it's difficult to see how that would be the case, because effectively the fence is there to be assessed as it's seen on the pictures, in terms of actually, is there any planning harm in the first instance, which the land ownership doesn't directly relate to.
Paragraph 4.3 on page 226. You mean, it just says it there in black and white. Your property services achieved the movement of the fence and costs were recovered and the matter was resolved. That's what it says there. That is totally separate to what we're saying, which is planning. You can't mix the two. They're not relevant to each other. It's a planning matter. Well, it's there, but the point is it's a planning matter, and the officers are right. If we as a committee judge that we consider on planning terms that we would not have agreed for the open space to go, then that is a decision that this committee can come to, and hence the original motion has moved. If we disagree with that, and you would have given permission, then that's for this committee to come to a decision on. It's in our gift to whether we agree or disagree, isn't it? And that's the point of having us here in the first place.
And I think if I can just thank Councillor Harvey, and again, understand the question, Councillor Frost, but I think the reason for it being there in the report is that it doesn't form part of the assessment, which is effectively the expediency for enforcement from 4.8 onwards. It was really just trying to give the context as to how the enforcement complaint came about in the first place, as opposed to it being material to the assessment of the expediency, if that clarifies.
Thank you very much, Chair. Okay, in that case, I withdraw the motion.
Thank you. Right, we need to finish off and all go home. So I will move the officer recommendation for no enforcement. Is there a seconder? Councillor Godison, thank you. Those in favour of no further action? 5. And those against no further action? 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. Well, I voted for no further action, so I will vote as the casting vote for no further action. Catherine, could you confirm the recommendation? And I do that with a very, very heavy heart, I'll tell you.
Thank you, Chairman. I would confirm there that members have resolved that it is not expedient to take enforcement action with the file to be closed and no further action to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much to the officers. And you've got another DC in about 2 weeks, and I'll give you my apologies now. That evening will be chaired by Councillor Harvey. Thank you. Good night.